The main character, a blue-eyed blonde, slightly embarrassed, bent down in front of the handsome, dark-haired gentleman and said that she wanted him to love her for a year. The girl added that this was a good deal for him, because in return, she would use her magic, thanks to which she could predict the future. The man smiled and whispered to the young lady that it was very sweet, which made her cheeks blush, then said that he accepted her offer. Then the protagonist, choking from coughing, realizes that she has to pay for this magic with her own life, but the master does not need to know this. The main character is confident that she would prefer to live life to the fullest, even if it is only for 1 year. After clearing her throat, the lady looked at her palm and saw blood on it. For her, this man named Enoch was a means to an end. But the more time they spent together, the more she began to appreciate the bright moments in life and began to want more. One day, Enoch, approaching the girl who was sitting on the bed in just her nightgown, said that he would do anything to kiss her now. Before the lady had time to answer him, the young gentleman laid her down on the bed and hung over her from above. The protagonist looked at him with embarrassment, and the man asked with a smile, "If this is what people call love." The girl closed her eyes and sighed when the brunette, leaving a wet mark on her neck with his tongue, asked if this was the love she wanted from him. Enoch, in one movement, baring his muscular body, asked his beloved to tell him that she now wanted the same thing as he did. The lips of a man and a girl are intertwined in a passionate kiss. The heroine does not want this magic spell to ever end. However, the protagonist wondered if they would soon lose this moment forever. The main question before her was when her magic would stop working. The main character's mother died when she was 9. The day of her funeral was rainy, and the father and daughter stood in front of the coffin under an umbrella. The woman's death occurred on a stormy winter night, and she fell asleep by an open window and died of hypothermia. The father, without taking his eyes off his wife's coffin, told the child that she needed a new mother. And right after the girl's mother was buried, her father introduced her to her stepmother, who turned out to be a very unpleasant person. That's how it all began. From that moment on, the protagonist, named Eleonora Lopez, became an outcast in her own family. 20 years have passed since that day, and a girl's voice calls out to the grown-up heroine, who had not listened to her because she was lost in thought. Ellen's half-sister, a girl with red hair and green eyes, named Helen, asked her why the dress was in her closet. Another stepsister, Melissa, asked her not to tell her that she didn't want to go to the spring formal, and her stepbrother said that if she went, she would be a laughingstock. Eleonora stood silently, thinking that her father had bought her this dress on one of his business trips, and that this was his first and last gift. Stepmother Margot Lopez, who was relaxing in a chair with a cup of tea, told her daughter that she had a lot to do on the day of the ball and did not need to attend. Although the girl's fingers trembled, she told her stepmother that she was right and would not go to the ball. The heroine remembered that she had become an adult long ago at 21. She had entered high society once, at 18 when she had her debutante ball. Helen told her sister that she would take her dress since she was not going to the ball anyway, otherwise it would just rot in her closet. Eleanor agreed with her, then sighed sadly, thinking that the same thing always happened. One day, the protagonist, along with other cooks, was preparing dinner. She is an ordinary servant in the kitchen covered in ash. Eleanor never dreamed of attending a formal ball because she is an abandoned daughter. Many people think that she is her father's illegitimate child, but she is actually the legitimate daughter of Baron Lopez. The girl was cutting ingredients, but suddenly another cook snatched the knife from her hands. The servant sheepishly told Milady that they would sort things out themselves, and that she could go and rest a little. The protagonist looked down in embarrassment and told the maid that she would do as she advised. But suddenly, she noticed the contemptuous glances of the cooks. There is a reason why everyone in the estate looks down on her, which her father simply ignores. The main reason is her late mother. One day, Eleanor overheard 2 maids talking about how she would only bring bad luck because her mother was crazy. The main character was overcome with sadness when the girls suggested that she might pour boiling water on them again, just like her mother had once done. The maid, when Madame poured hot tea on her face, screamed in pain and fell to the floor while her friend rushed to her aid. The little protagonist, trembling all over, asked her unwavering mother why she had poured boiling water on the girl's face. She, having humbled her daughter with an empty, lifeless look, calmly said that she dared to have a name similar to hers. Eleanor, passing by her mother's portrait and carrying a tray with her dinner, thinks that it was not about love. Her mother only considered her property. Poor Ella continued to work in their palace with a scar on her face. As a child, the heroine overheard her saying that she believed in karma. The maid said she hoped that what the lady had done to her would come back to her daughter doubly. She would be abandoned by the man she loved. The heroine thinks that Ella may have been right. Her father shows no interest in her, and she feels like the ugly duckling in the family. Then the girl is pulled out of her thoughts by a black cat named Lucy, who began to rub against her leg in search of affection and attention. Eleanor stopped at a slightly open door, put down her tray, and bent down to pet the fluffy one. The girl told the cat that he was a cutie, and that he was the only one in this house who loved her. But then Cinderella overhears a conversation between her sister and her friend about whether she knows who is going to come to the upcoming ball. The Duke of Bayern. The main character asked the cat to be quieter so that she could quietly eavesdrop on the girl's conversation. Helen told her friend that she was going to meet his lordship, but she was very nervous because they said he was very handsome. The protagonist thought about the fact that even she had heard of the Duke of Bayern, although she rarely appeared in high society. Enoch Bayern. Friedrich is a prince of the royal Friedrich family, rulers of Frieden. He is a war hero and ruler of the northeastern lands of Leinfelden. Iris Philowain, a friend of Eleanor's half-sister, shared that Lady Penelope would soon propose to His Highness. Helen had been pining for Enoch for a long time, so she asked if it was true since Penelope was rumored to be engaged to someone else, and she said that their families had been in talks. The heroine decided to go further, listening to how the red-haired one was not satisfied with the fact that the whole kingdom revered Penelope, although she was more beautiful than hers. But the girl froze when she heard Iris ask if Eleanor would be attending the spring ball this year. Philowain added that the protagonist is boring and gloomy, rarely leaving the estate. Harton asked why she would be at the ball. Lady Lopez heard her stepsister say that she was just a lowly maid who didn't even have a dress to wear. The main character, clenching her jaw, moved on, not wanting to hear Harton wash the bones about her mother. She and the cat came to her room, which, unlike the rooms of her other sisters, was shabby and old. Milady sat down on the bed, thinking that she would not find peace and quiet in this house, and it seemed to her that everyone was excited about the upcoming spring ball. But suddenly, Lucy brings her a newspaper and an envelope containing a letter from the king where he officially invites Elena Lopez to the spring ball, which will take place at the Avon Palace on Friday at 8 p.m. Plopping down on the bed, the main character thinks that she was sent this invitation because she is the daughter of a marquise, but she doubts that she will go to it. In any case, she is interested to see whether the Duke of Bayern will be present, and whether he is as handsome as in this newspaper, and as Harton says about him. The protagonist decided that she shouldn't make fun of her sister behind her back, since she too was fascinated by Enoch's appearance when she saw his portrait. The girl got out of bed and looked at the luxurious dress that was located on a mannequin in her room. The heroine thought with embarrassment that she had already forgotten that she had sewn herself a dress for the ball, but decided to try it on a little. After putting it on and doing her hair in a simple style, Eleanor looked in the mirror and declared that it looked absolutely beautiful. Warren Nobert, Enoch's friend, looked at his watch after talking to him and cried out that he had to go already because he had a date with Mercedes. The Duke, watching him, thinks that he himself does not want to get married, does not even want a long life. The peasant thinks that love and marriage are only for fools. Smoking his pipe, he convinces himself that love affairs are for those who have too much free time, but for him it means nothing. Meanwhile, the stepmother tells her stepdaughter that she was supposed to bring the laundry from the laundry, to which she says that she does. The woman then asked the already busy heroine if she had finished her housework, and the girl said no. The stepmother sighed with displeasure and asked her daughter why she was doing everything so slowly. The spring ball is being held today. Helen and Melissa are already busy preparing for such an important event, but the protagonist was busy with housework. She apologized to her mother for doing everything so slowly. Eleanor, of course, didn't have time to prepare with such a schedule, but she had her own plan. Meanwhile, at Bayern Palace, a disgruntled Warren asks Enoch if this means he is not interested in getting married this year. The guy angrily reminded his friend that he was already 25 years old, and it was time to think about getting married. especially since all the ladies were in love with him because he was still single. He explained that because all the girls are in love with him, it is difficult for other bachelors to find brides for themselves, so they are angry with him. Then the friend said he knew what the problem was. The fact is that His Majesty is impatient to marry off his younger brother. Warren suggested that at this rate, he would have to marry not for love, but for convenience, to which Enoch remained silent. But then the Duke said that Penelope was ready to enter into a contract marriage with him. The Marquis asked if he meant Saint Penelope, then said that he did not consider her a dreamer, and that contract marriage only happens in novels. Nobert asked his friend not to say that this beautiful girl was so in love with him that she blushed next to him. He rolled his eyes and thought that she didn't seem to be in love with him at all, because she had this expression on her face as if she hated him. However, the Duke said with a grin that Penelope was clearly in the clouds and simply obsessed with love affairs. Warren irritably told his friend that it was time for him to start eating a proper breakfast and not just smoking a cigarette, because at this rate he would die early. Meanwhile, the stepmother tells her stepdaughter that when she finishes her chores, she can come to the ball. She thinks that she can do it. The woman slapped the servants, giving the order that they were freed from work, telling the heroine that at this rate she would never be able to come to the ball. Eleanor thought furiously that she would have time to do everything before her stepmother looked back. Then her sisters who were going to the ball passed by her. Mom, not paying any attention to the heroine, told the girls that they both looked charming as always. But as soon as the protagonist looked at this charm, she and her cat almost lost their jaws from shock. The girls were wearing a lot of jewelry. Their dresses were the latest fashion, and their hair was braided up and also decorated with beads. Eleanor thought with horror that they looked too fancy. Helen asked her mother if she looked good, as the feather decoration was quite heavy, and she said that they should do everything to stand out. The mother sternly reminded her daughters not to forget to smile when they met the gentleman's eyes, because they had to get married before the end of the month. The heroine, continuing to clean, remembered that Margot had been trying to marry off her girls since they debuted last year. Their family is too poor to provide a decent dowry, so it will be difficult for the Lopez sisters to find a husband from a wealthy family. But suddenly, the mother's scream made the protagonist and her pet flinch. The woman furiously asked Melissa why she was wearing those ribbons. The mother told her daughter that with her features she should wear bright colors. She said she thought these would go well with her dress. Hearing this, the stepmother, with frozen horror on her face, asked the girl how she dared to talk to her like that. Then Margot scolded Elena for taking too long to clean. She added that everyone in this house irritated her except her beloved son. Ellen continued to silently wash the floors, and the angry mother ordered her daughters to quickly go to the carriage. But the heroine remembers that her beloved Anthony is most likely mired in debt from gambling. But his mother either doesn't know this or turns a blind eye to it. Suddenly, the worker looked at her watch and cried out. She had to do everything before the clock struck 10, because she really wanted to put on the dress that she had sewn herself. Time passed, and Eleanor joyfully exclaimed that she had finally done all the housework. Looking at her watch, she realized that it was already 15 minutes past 10, and if she prepared herself now, she would be able to enjoy the ball a little. Inspired by the upcoming event, the girl went to get ready, promising herself that she would do everything to get out of this house. Soon, Cinderella, dressed in her luxurious dress, appeared at the palace where the spring ball was taking place. She couldn't take her eyes off such an exquisite building because she had lower expectations and just wanted to escape reality a little. While enjoying the celebration with a glass of champagne, the lady thought that she had no idea that balls could be so exciting. But suddenly, the protagonist was noticed by Helen, who was standing not far from her. The girl wondered if this was her sister, because there was a resemblance. However, Madame decided with a sneer that it could not be Eleanor, since she could not possibly finish all her business and come to the ball. Here the main character noticed that some kind of commotion had started among the guests and began to monitor everything to find out what was going on. It turns out that Duke Enoch Byron himself showed up at the ball and was solemnly introduced by the announcer. All the ladies present began to admire how handsome this gentleman was, and Cinderella, among others, thought that he was even more beautiful in real life. The heroine was so engrossed in looking at the man that she noticed how he directed his gaze in her direction. The girl immediately turned away, embarrassed by the fact that their eyes most likely met. The young lady was so embarrassed that as she walked back, she didn't even notice how she stepped on a man's foot with her heel. Turning around, she saw a gentleman of venerable age who was surprised by the unpleasant situation with a smile. The main character immediately bowed to Sir and apologized for her clumsiness, but he said that she had nothing to worry about. The man with an annoying smile told the young lady that his name was Anderson, then calling Alina, his little flower asked her name. The protagonist felt uncomfortable being in the company of this gentleman, and she hurried to leave, but he grabbed her hand. The ball guests began to watch as an adult man held Miss Lopez down and questioned her about her family. The frightened heroine asked Anderson to let her go, but he frighteningly approaching her face said that she had dressed up for the ball, and it would be a shame if everything went to waste. But suddenly, the girl's patience breaks, and she abruptly pulls her hand away. However, the lady did not take into account that she moved too hard, which caused her to lose her balance. Suddenly, a certain man stopped the unfortunate woman from falling, grabbing her by the shoulder with his hand. It turned out to be Duke Enoch himself, who told the girl that he had finally found her. Anderson stared at Elena and Byron in shock, and the gentlemen around him began to whisper as they looked at them. Taking advantage of the moment, the Duke whispered to the stranger that he had been looking for her everywhere. As soon as the main character turned around, she saw that she had been saved from falling by a man whose appearance she was crazy about. Enoch asked the lady if she had calmed down, and she said yes, after which she bowed before the gentleman and thanked him. However, the young man suddenly asked what she was thanking him for. She, taken aback by such a question, asked the gentleman what he meant. Sir Anderson was shocked when the Duke asked the girl not to tell him that she would have preferred that man instead of him. The elderly Earl became even more angry when Lady Lopez, looking at him, told Enoch that she would not like to spend time with him. Then the Duke, extending his hand to Ellen to invite her to dance, asked what she expected in that case. At that moment, the protagonist felt the intense gaze of those around her, their hatred, surprise, and even curiosity. However, looking behind the young master, she thought that it was not only that. Her stepmother and stepsister watched her with disgust. Eleanor could see the anger flashing in Helen's eyes. Cinderella wondered what would happen if she offered her hand to a man, or on the contrary, refused. Everyone would be shocked in any case. The girl realized that no matter what choice she made, gossip would spread about her. Deciding that she would be a cause for scandal anyway, the main character extended her hand to Enoch and said that it was a great honor for her. The Duke and Miss Lopez, along with other couples, twirled in a graceful dance. Eleanor, occasionally glancing at the gentleman's face, understands that there is absolutely no emotion in his eyes, and it does not seem that he is crazy about her. At that moment, when his lordship spun his partner around and launched her, holding her by the back, the heroine realized that he didn't even know her name. After dancing a waltz, the man and the girl bowed to the other guests. The latter thought that now everything seemed unreal to her, as if it were a midsummer night's dream. The protagonist then turned to the Duke, but he immediately walked away from her without saying a word. Cinderella sadly remained standing in the middle of the dance floor, deciding that Enoch really wasn't interested in her. The lady, her cheeks blushing and her hand pressed to her chest, wondered why he had done that to her. But then the girl turned around and saw that her stepmother and stepsister had approached her, looking at her with very suspicious eyes. Harton pointed angrily at her sister and called her a sly little fox. The main character watched in fear as her mother suddenly grabbed her daughter by the hand. She, without taking her eyes off Ellen, whispered that now was not the time for a showdown, and she could take revenge when they returned home. The protagonist turned and walked away without saying a word. She hoped that wouldn't happen. The girl decided to go out onto the balcony to get some fresh air. She thinks that this place is the best place to hide. Suddenly, Miss Lopez thought about how strange her day had been. She had been lucky enough to ride in a carriage and waltz with a man she had only admired from afar. Looking at the night sky, the lady wondered whether this was luck or, on the contrary, a trap. And not only that, Enoch Byron seemed to Cinderella to be the embodiment of God. Majestic, proud, and beautiful. Eleanor realized she felt a little jealous, even though she shouldn't have. The Duke is very different from the main character, who was abandoned by her own father. Suddenly, the doors to the balcony opened, and Enoch and a richly dressed man entered through them. The latter asked the Duke if he really didn't care, The protagonist, quickly hiding behind the wall, wondered in surprise what his lordship had forgotten here. Enoch grabbed his head and asked why everyone was so worried about his marriage. The blonde told his friend that he was already past the age when people get married, to which the Duke, calling his interlocutor brother, said that he was only 25. It dawned on the main character that if he called that man brother, it meant that he was Henry Friedrich, the king of the Kingdom of Frieden. Henry told Enoch that he himself had married at 20, but Enoch asked why he should even look for a wife and start a family. The king asked his brother who the lady he had danced with was, saying that he had asked him to talk to the girls, but thought that he had not listened to him. Eleonora, still hiding behind the wall, turned around and strained her ears. The Duke replied to His Majesty that he did not know who the girl was. He asked if it meant that he had danced with a stranger. But suddenly, Enoch, whose face twisted into a sly smile, said that he had decided to ask that lady to dance only because he felt sorry for her. The main character's eyes widened in shock when she heard these words. The king asked his brother if he danced with her out of pity, then said that he knew for sure that he did not do good deeds without a reason. He chuckled and said he was just feeling merciful, and found it funny to watch the lady get scared and shake. Henry told Enoch that he could be very mean sometimes, and asked him if he could say it in a more gentle way. However, the Duke retorted that he was simply telling the truth, causing Eleonora to hang her head in dismay. As she sank to the floor, she realized why his lordship hadn't even bothered to ask her name. He hadn't considered her worthy, he had only been merciful to her. The protagonist remembered the moment when she, as usual, cleaning the room, heard Harton talking to his friend and asking if her bracelet was beautiful. She answered that it was. The girl said that she thought so, and then didn't even notice how she touched the cup on the table with her hand. The dishes fell to the floor and broke into a pile of pieces, and the water that was in them spilled across the floor. Upset by this embarrassment, Harton called out to her half-sister and ordered her to clean up the mess. Eleonora obediently leaned over the broken cup, while Iris, who was sitting on a chair nearby, looked down at her. Miss Filone watched as the main character bent over the floor silently and painstakingly cleaned up the remains of broken china. But suddenly, she decided to ask Cinderella why she lived like this. She looked at the girl from such an unexpected question and asked what she meant. Iris, calling the worker poor thing, said that she should look for a suitable husband to leave this place. Eleonora's fingertips trembled as she recalled the incident. She thought she had gotten used to all the ridicule, but every time it hurt her so much. The girl wanted to get to her feet, but accidentally tripped over her own shoe. The main character fell painfully to the floor, letting out a short but loud frightened cry. Looking at her bare foot, the lady thought that it hurt so much that she seemed to have twisted her ankle. But suddenly, the men who were on the balcony, hearing someone's voice nearby, asked if there was anyone else there. Cinderella, hiding back behind the wall, covered her mouth with her hands, hoping that she would not be caught. Just as Lopez was wondering what to do, a loud bell rang. The girl realized that she had an opportunity to escape, but after thinking for a long time, she ran along the empty corridors of the palace and found herself on the street, where she immediately rushed to the carriage. Out of breath, Eleonora approached the coachman and said that she urgently needed to get to the Heverington 11, after which she handed the man some of the money, promising to pay the rest as soon as they arrived. The protagonist got into the carriage, after which the taxi left for the designated address. Cinderella went home in a bad mood, with a broken ankle and a lost shoe, but she asked herself not to dwell on it. Meanwhile, Enoch was walking around the palace, as usual, thinking about how loud the bells had sounded. Entering the same balcony, he immediately realized that someone was there. The man felt someone's presence, but did not bother to look. Suddenly, the Duke's boot stumbles upon an unusual find, a slipper of a soft blue color. Enoch, looking at the thing with a serious expression, came to the conclusion that the culprit was a lady. This, as he thinks, is a maid, or a lady from a dysfunctional family. But then Mr. Byron thought about the fact that the girl with whom he danced the waltz had the same shoes. Then the king appeared on the balcony and said that no one was found here. Suddenly, Enoch smiled at him and called him "dear brother." He immediately became agitated and asked what he had in mind to address him so kindly. He, with the same grin, asked his brother if he could pick this thing up for him, pointing his finger at the shoe lying on the floor. The king clutched his head wearily and remembered that Enoch had mysophobia, a fear of contamination, and he always wore gloves when he left the house. In the event that he needs to shake hands with some gentleman, he also does not take off his gloves at such moments. The Duke also never wears the same pair of gloves twice. He simply throws away the old ones. But Henry was furious that even now his brother had the audacity to ask the king to lift something for him. Enoch just shrugged indifferently and told the king that he was in fact his brother. The ruler sighed in disappointment, giving up trying to convince the Duke. The Duke added that he would eventually do what he had asked. Picking up the shoe, Henry asked his friend if it belonged to his girlfriend, to which the friend asked if it looked like it could belong to someone he knew. As he was about to leave to do his business, the dark-haired gentleman asked his brother to throw away the shoes, which left him completely dumbfounded. Turning to the king, Enoch added with a sly smile that they both did not want any trash in Evan's palace. The king, having carefully examined the slipper, thought that if his guess was correct, then he knew to whom it might belong. The main character's personal room was still in its former shabby state, but now there was only one of her shoes in it. The stepmother, having watched Eleanor wash the floors irritably, asked her if this could be called cleaning. The girl didn't answer her, and the mother suddenly slapped her daughter hard in the face. The worker was very frightened and put her palm to her burning reddened cheek. To top it all off, the stepmother also stepped on my foot with her toe, crushing it painfully. Smiling sinisterly, the woman told Cinderella that she could consider it karma for daring to covet something she didn't deserve. She added irritably that his lordship had only danced with her out of pity. Mama reminded her stepdaughter that she had been wearing a worn dress ever since she had attended the lavish spring ball at Avon Palace. Madame asked the girl why she had disgraced Count Anderson so much, then explained that she should apologize to him like a true lady. The stepmother angrily asked Eleanor whether she would be willing to take full responsibility if he filed a complaint against their family. The protagonist, remaining silent, looked away. She understands her mother's true intentions. The heroine said that she would send Anderson a letter of apology, to which the woman said that it would be better for her, and that she and Harton would soon leave. As she left, the stepmother nudged her stepdaughter in the shoulder, adding that she needed to clean up the second-floor hallway while she was gone. Cinderella said that she would do so, looking at the mistress of the house with a devastated look. As the sunset approached, Melissa called out to Elena, who asked what was the matter. She, holding a book in her hand, shyly admitted that she wanted to ask her for a favor. Cinderella asked what it was about, and her sister said that the thing was that her mother asked her to return the book to the royal library, but she was busy at the moment. Melissa smiled sweetly and told the worker that she would appreciate it if she would take the book back to the library on her behalf. However, the heroine felt something was wrong with this, because Helen always asks her for favors, but her sister does not. So it looks strange. When Eleanor asked if there was a reason why she could go herself, the girl with the book trembled excitedly. The heroine showed her anger to her sister by looking her straight in the eyes. She asked her to be honest and asked why she was asking for a favor. She said that she really needed to take care of something urgent, then asked if she could do it, adding that it was not much to ask. The protagonist explained that it was an hour's walk to the royal library and that she would not call it a simple favor. Melissa asked the girl, embarrassed, if she could call a carriage in that case, especially since it was not expensive. Eleanor hung her head and fell silent, and her half-sister said that she did not look happy, and then asked what was wrong. The heroine sadly confessed to the lady that she did not have a penny, because her mother took everything she had from her just because she dared to dance with the Duke. Suddenly, Cinderella, turning her gaze back to her sister, saw that she was barely holding back her demonic laughter. Melissa, looking at the worker with a wild smile, was surprised that she had just called the mistress of the house her mother. Eleanor began to suspect that something was wrong, and looking around, she saw that her stepmother and Harton had been standing in the doorway all this time. The woman's furious gaze was frighteningly mixed with her smile when she asked the heroine what she called her madame, assumed that she most likely had difficulty recognizing her as the mistress of this house. Cinderella staggered in surprise because she guessed what Melissa was really trying to achieve, to bring her mother into conflict. Mrs. Lopez, approaching the protagonist, said that a person can endure a lot, and even though she was her father's second wife, she still gave birth to his heir. Getting closer to Ellen's face, the stepmother added that her dead mother was not able to look after the family because she was not quite right in the head. Pointing her finger at the worker, the woman exclaimed that she should at least be grateful that she had not been kicked out. The heroine said that she thought that she wanted Melissa to return the books because she hoped to introduce her to the royal librarian. The stepmother irritably asked the girl how she dared to contradict her, but she stated that she had not finished her sentence. Eleonora continued speaking, reminding that she is also part of the Lopez family and is not someone who was taken off the streets. But before the main character could finish speaking, her stepmother slapped her with all her might. The girl silently fell to the floor, and Madame calmly began to talk about the fact that she was indeed the Marquise's daughter, and that Helen and Melissa belonged to her ex-husband. The evil lady asked Cinderella if this was what she was trying to tell them to, which she, covering her reddened cheek, said that it was not so. The worker received a second blow to the face, from which she also staggered and fell to the floor. Shaking with fear, Eleonora listened as her stepmother told her that she apparently wanted to become a cripple and that she should not strive for something that was beyond her reach. Having thrown a book on the floor in front of the unfortunate woman, the mistress of the house ordered her to go to the library immediately. Mrs. Lopez mockingly told her stepdaughter that if she was lucky, she would catch the eye of some royal librarian. Soon the protagonist came to the right address. The building looked more like a luxurious theater than the royal library. Cinderella, walking with difficulty because of her broken ankle, which caused passers-by to look at her, thought that she would not get better if she did not rest. The girl looked at the cloudy sky, in which lightning flashed. The heroine was upset by the fact that on top of everything else, it was also going to rain. Entering the library, Eleonora successfully returned the book to the librarian, after which she bowed, preparing to leave. But then the man asked her to stay a little longer, and the lady turned to him. The book depository worker told Milady that she had a broken ankle, then asked if she had walked all the way, to which she said yes. Having handed the worker a few coins, the librarian told her to call a carriage for herself for this money, because if she went on foot, she would get worse. Eleanor was very surprised and said that she could not accept this money, but the man began to convince her that she would soon be caught in the rain with her sore leg. While convincing the gentleman that she was okay, the heroine accidentally turned around, but suddenly noticed something that made her heart stop. Two richly dressed men appeared in the library, and the girls around them, seeing them, began to whisper among themselves with smiles. As it turned out, the gentleman who attracted the attention of all the ladies was Enoch Byron himself. Warren, walking to the book depository, told his friend that after he donated a lot of money to renovate the library, he never came to see it. The boy considered this inhumane because in his situation, he would come here every day, but Enoch continued to remain silent. The chief thief of women's hearts remembers that a year has already passed since the War of Atreus ended. As Warren had said, he donated a large sum to the renovation of the Royal Library, which surprised some people, given the country was at war. However, having won the war and successfully restored the book depository, Byron became a national hero. Entering the luxurious building, the Marquis told his friend that the head of the library must be jumping for joy because he was able to rebuild it so luxuriously and during the war. But Enoch, looking around the room, sighed in disappointment and thought that the old man in charge of the building had such vulgar taste. The Duke's thoughts were occupied by the fact that the old man had rebuilt the library, making it look like a temple, no doubt, to keep Atreus in fear. Warren spoke excitedly about what if the Atreus wanted to start a war over the library, again arguing that they were fanatics. Suddenly, Enoch, looking at his friend with a frighteningly piercing gaze, said that they were so weak that they resorted to black magic. The embarrassed Marquis decided to tell his friend what the weekly gossip magazines had written about him. He asked with whom, meaning Penelope. But Warren was stunned to say that the newspapers were all about him and the mysterious lady he had danced with at the ball. The Duke said indifferently that he was not interested in the girl at all, but then his friend asked why he had chosen her among all of them. Before answering the question, Enoch noticed something unusual out of the corner of his eye. He caught a slight movement behind the column he was passing. The young man smiled because he guessed who could be hiding from him there. He said with a smile that sometimes he wants something unusual. Warren asked if he meant that he considered himself fickle, to which he replied that something like that. But then Enoch, stepping forward, decided that he had had enough of this nonsense, and then announced that he was leaving. His agitated friend asked him what had come over him, and begging him to wait a little chased after him. Only when the men moved away, the main character, who had been hiding behind a column all this time, was able to come out. The girl looked thoughtfully after the guys, not finding the strength to smile. Ellen managed to get out of the library unnoticed, or so she thought, and when she stepped outside, she was immediately caught in a pouring rain. As she quickly walks down the stairs, the girl can't believe that the weather has gotten so bad, because she might catch a cold if she continues walking like this. Coughing from the cold, the main character suddenly noticed a young mother with a child whom she was passing by chance, and immediately remembered that her mother died on the same rainy day as today. The protagonist recalls how, as a very little girl, she looked at her mother's coffin with confusion and could not accept what was happening. At these thoughts, Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She raised her face to him and asked her mother why she had left her. But suddenly, the voice of a man who appeared next to her made Cinderella emerge from her thoughts. It was Enoch, who, getting wet in the rain, but not without his sly smile, told the girl that she was the owner of the worn-out shoe. She was quite taken aback by the gentleman's appearance, and asked him what he was doing there. The Duke, approaching her, asked why she was asking him such questions, if she herself was there for some reason. The man whispered to the beauty that the friend he was with had left him, then asked if she was the one hiding behind that column, since hiding was not her strong point. Byron, watching the heroine tremble before him, thought that she looked like a cowardly victim before a predator. The young man, having examined Milady's legs, said that she had in fact sprained her ankle. Not waiting for an answer from the coward, Enoch leaned even closer to the lady and asked if she was going to answer him. But suddenly, he grabbed the girl under his shoulder and led her to the road, where he stopped a passing carriage for them in time. The surprised heroine asked what it all meant, but the Duke silently threw her into the carriage, where she landed on a soft seat. Following her into the carriage, a young gentleman entered and told the worker that she was talking after all. The man asked Eleanor if she had a house, and when she answered that she did, he pointed his finger at the coachman, hinting that she should tell him the address. The protagonist had to take a deep breath and accept everything. She asked the driver to take her to 11 Heverington Street. The carriage, cutting through the dim city streets, through the pouring rain, arrived at the appointed place. Enoch asked his interlocutor how a maid like her got to the ball. She laughed at his words and said that she was allowed to because of her hard work. The man suddenly declared that for a simple maid, attending a ball was not quite her thing. The girl said that she could not miss such an opportunity because it was once in a lifetime. The gentleman asked if it was worth it. Mr. Byron, bending his body towards the lady, asked if she wanted to know why he had decided to dance with her. She, thinking that the Duke was beginning to irritate her, replied that she simply felt sorry for him. A thin smile appeared on the man's face, and he told the girl that she knew her place. Eleanor looked at his lordship in bewilderment and thought that he was making fun of her. But then the worker was slightly surprised when the young man asked her if she was sure that she had no hope. The main character was completely stunned when the gentleman asked if she expected anything more when she danced with him at the ball. The protagonist guessed that Enoch was testing her and wanted to check whether she had succumbed to his charms, because any lady would have high hopes in such a situation. But Cinderella decided that she was no longer that naive girl with doe eyes. She lowered her indifferent gaze and grinned. This reaction of Milady greatly surprised the Duke, who expected completely different actions from her. Meanwhile, the carriage was already approaching the desired address, the main character's house, after which it stopped. Eleanor, deciding that she had better get out of the carriage before things got worse, stood up and thanked Byron for the ride, hurrying away. But then the cat Lucy ran up to the carriage and saw her beloved owner in the window of the vehicle. The animal, imagining how the girl would joyfully greet and pet her, happily rubbed its muzzle against the leg of the horse that was tied to the carriage. The ungulate was very frightened by the animal that suddenly appeared under his feet, jumped up and growled, which shocked the coachman. This caused the carriage to stagger, and the protagonist, who had not yet managed to get out, lost her balance and fell to the ground with a frightened scream. But suddenly, the girl manages to land successfully, right on his lordship's lap, leaning her hands on the seat above his shoulders. Enoch smirked, looked the main character straight in the eyes, and said that she was simply something. Hey, Cinderella burst into sweat and was so confused that she couldn't utter a word. The lady said irritably that it was not on purpose, and the man holding my lady by the waist asked with a smile if she felt embarrassed. Eleanor, with a blush on her cheeks, looked away and said that she had been embarrassed from the beginning, but it was not intentional. Suddenly, the Duke grabbed the lady by the forearm with his other hand, pulling her even closer to him. There were only a couple of centimeters left between the faces of the main character and his lordship, and the latter, with a sly smile, said that he didn't think so. The protagonist, embarrassed by the fact that their faces almost touched, moved away from the man and indignantly repeated that it was an accident. The girl apologized to the gentleman and asked him to let her leave quickly, but he did not remove his hand from her waist for a long time. Nevertheless, Enoch released Milady, spreading his arms out to the sides as if nothing had happened. Before leaving, Cinderella modestly thanked the Duke for giving her a ride, then said that she would definitely repay him. He grinned and, without taking his eyes off the commoner, said that she really thought he only wanted money. But then he rose from his seat and approached the lady, asking how she would repay him. Eleanor said that she would give him the money. The young gentleman, taking the girl by the chin, suddenly asked her to bring the money herself. The dumbfounded heroine asked what he meant. The Duke told Cinderella that she knew his address, then repeated that she needed to bring the money herself and not send it by mail. After this, his lordship told Milady that she could go, and the protagonist quickly found herself outside. The hard worker went to the threshold of the house, not even suspecting that her half-sister had been watching her the whole time. Harton was very surprised when she saw that their maid had arrived home by carriage and not on foot. As soon as Eleanor entered the house, her sister bombarded her with questions about how she had managed to get there by carriage when she had not a penny in her pocket. She assumed that the librarian had given her the money. The girl found it funny that the Marquise's daughter was begging for money to ride in a carriage. She, smiling and pointing her finger at the worker, asked her not to forget that men communicate with her out of pity and never take her seriously. As soon as the lady said that she could ruin their family's reputation, the main character turned to her and calmly said that nothing like that would happen. Cinderella went on about her business, only thinking about how Harton was insecure, while she was angry at her for such an answer. But then the protagonist meets another stepsister on her way, who greets her. Melissa, trying her best to act like a different modest kind girl, asked Ellen how her ankle was. The blonde was disgusted by this acting, so she walked past and asked her to go away. But suddenly, Harton, grabbing Cinderella by the scarf on her head, furiously asked where she was going, because Melissa had not yet finished talking to hers. The embittered lady did not let the worker go and called her ungrateful, which made the other sister quietly giggle. But the next moment, this hypocrite asked Harton to stop holding Eleanor's head because it was probably hurting her, sir. She was surprised by her words and indignantly said that she was too soft-hearted. Throwing the said maid into her shabby room, the stepsister ordered her not to bother her anymore. Left alone in the room, the protagonist struggled to rise, leaning on her hands and holding back the tears that welled up. Sitting down in the same place where she fell, the girl thought that she was already tired of all this. Night came, but the rain outside did not stop. Cinderella sat down with the cat on the bed, looking at the wall and thinking about her own things. Remembering how Enoch had flirted with her, she remembered that he had said that he had only danced with her out of pity, so she did not want to get involved with him. Looking at the rain pouring outside the window, the girl thought that, frankly speaking, she could have sent the money by courier. However, she changed her mind. Maybe the main character was touched by the way he looked for her in the rain. Cinderella looked away in embarrassment, thinking that she was sure that she was heading straight into a trap and was acting like an idiot. The next day, the stepmother, leaving her husband's office where she had a conversation with him, promises him that she will do everything as he said. But suddenly, Margot was overcome with rage, all the fault of which was her hated stepdaughter. Everything had changed since she found herself in the royal library. The lady of the manor is perplexed by how Ellen dared to go to her father and say that she needed rest until her ankle recovered. Mrs. Lopez doesn't understand why her husband has suddenly taken on the role of a loving father when he doesn't even care what's going on in the house. She assumes his daughter is using him for her own ends. Since Cinderella was holed up in the attic because of her sore leg forgetting about her duties around the house, the stepmother had to spend money to hire a servant. Nervously biting her nails, the woman thinks that she should have gotten rid of this devil when she had the chance. A daughter of marriageable age is a great asset to any noble family, and in this regard Eleanor has more to offer than Helen and Melissa. Although the heroine is a true aristocrat, in whom Lopez's blood flows, her stepmother does not consider her a beauty. However, men cannot take their eyes off her. The Baroness understands that her two daughters must find a good match. If only she had someone who would rid her of this thorn, her stepdaughter. With these thoughts, Mom was going down the stairs, but suddenly she heard someone on the first floor excitedly calling out to hers. It turned out to be her son Anthony, who was not in the best shape. His face was covered in bruises, and he was holding his stomach with his hand. The mother ran up to the boy, grabbed him by the shoulders, and asked what happened to him and why his face was in such a state. He, trembling with fear, admitted that he seemed to have big problems. The woman was about to go to the showdown, promising that she would get to those people who did this to her heir, but Anthony suddenly stopped her. The boy, drenched in sweat, and without looking up, asked his mother not to do this. The stepmother's soul sank into her heels when her son confessed that he had lost at the gaming table and was now in huge debt to Viscount Zellenham. The young man said that he only wanted to play a couple of games, but before he even realized it, everything led to him losing, for which he was beaten. Mrs. Lopez meanwhile remembers that Viscount Zellenham is known for his bad reputation. He and his gang will do anything for money. Anthony fell to his knees in front of his mother, tearfully asking what he should do now. But the woman did not pay any attention to him because she was consumed by fear and the thought that she was tired of constantly being in debt. The stepmother's name is Margot Losbel, and she is the daughter of a hairdresser. Her family consisted of commoners who were mired in poverty. One day they accumulated debts, and to avoid poverty, Margot married Walter de Sully, who was just an old beggar. Soon after this, she became pregnant, and her husband, when the labor began, hurriedly ran into her bedroom, wondering when the baby would arrive. But the wife giving birth to her first child really did not want him to take after her husband, whom she terribly hated. The woman in labor, just remembering Walter's disgusting face, wished even more that this would not happen. Soon the baby was born, and the servants began to prepare everything necessary for the young mother. Helen was born, and as her mother wanted, she turned out to be very beautiful and was not at all like her father. However, while Margot was delighted with the baby's arrival, her father was disappointed with her. He said that she had nothing but her attractiveness. Over time, the woman became pregnant with a second child, and after giving birth, the maid told the father that it was a girl again. Walter had hoped to have a son, but when he heard this, he slapped his wife on the cheek and called her useless, adding that in that case, she could come up with a name for the second daughter herself. After this, the man left, as if nothing had happened, and the maid excitedly asked Margot what she should do. She looked at her daughter and realized that she had not inherited her appearance at all. The mother lay down on the bed, indifferently, telling the maid that the girl's name should be Melissa. She didn't say anything else, to which the maid, looking at her, sighed sadly. Now the stepmother believes that, perhaps, this is why she concentrated her attention on Helen, who was more like her. The woman found it difficult to arouse interest in her youngest daughter, but since she was her child, she also took care of her. But Melissa, instead of inheriting her genes, grew up looking like her paternal aunt. Margot's husband's sister told her that her brother was quite cruel and that he should take better care of his wife and the state of the house. A slight chuckle came from the lady as she told the young mother that she had a lot of worries. Mrs. Losbel was angry that this lady dared to lord it over her, although she was as common as her brother, and the only thing she had was a husband from a wealthy family. Little Melissa, who had been hugging her aunt the whole time, was very scared when she saw her mother's hands shaking with rage. But then Margot, putting on a welcoming smile, asked her relative if she would like to have a cup of tea with her. She led the guest away, smiling sarcastically, because a plan had matured in her head. After the death of her husband, all property and real estate would pass into her hands. How one day a knight who arrived at the Losbel house informs his wife that her husband is now in prison, having been arrested for fraud. Returning home, Mom was overcome with panic. What other fraud had Walter been arrested for, and what would happen to their property? But Margot was horrified when she thought about what would happen to her and her daughters. Soon after victims of her husband's fraud showed up on her doorstep, The family was sued for damages. The mother and her two daughters hid in the corridor and trembled as they listened to the angry cries of people asking for the stolen money to be returned to them. As a result, the stepmother gave up the idea of inheriting the property and paid off the victims of his actions, leaving herself without a penny in her pocket. The exhausted woman, tired of these problems, silently read her husband's death certificate. After throwing away the document, she called her ex-husband a useless old man, then took her two daughters by the hand and led them out of the estate. Margot came to the deceased's sister for help, but she indifferently said that she sincerely sympathized with her, but she could not stay in her house all the time because her husband and family were not very happy about it. While drinking tea, the girl asked the mother of two children why she didn't go to the kitchen and help the maids clean up there. The widow was angered by her aunt's words that it would be better for her to send her children to a boarding school run by novices because it would be better for them. After that conversation, Miss Losbel, walking down the street, thought that she did not want to send her daughters to a boarding school run by nuns. She knows that the future of such students is doomed. At best, they will become governesses, but most become maids or novices. Margot is very worried about this because she did not raise her children so that they would spend the rest of their lives as a servant or a nun. But then the girl is pulled out of her thoughts by a passerby who, having accidentally bumped into another man, ordered him to be more careful and watch the road. The angry gentleman went on about his business, but the young lady noticed something unusual. He was grinning strangely. After this, the widow saw how a little boy took an expensive watch out of the pocket of another innocent man, but Margot stopped him. The unsuspecting man turned out to be Marquis Lopez. He turned around at the noise and saw that his watch had been stolen by a boy. Finally, the thief realized that he would not be able to steal the jewel, and giving up his attempts, ran away. Margot, with a poisonous smile, showed the man his watch and said that she had managed to prevent it from being stolen. The Marquis, having taken a table in a cafe with the red-haired stranger, thanked her for protecting his family heirloom. She asked how he, a nobleman, had ended up in this area. The man replied that he had only come here to find a cure for the mental illness that his wife suffered from. These words interested the girl in no small way, and she then listened to the gentleman more attentively. Lopez shared that they had gone to different doctors, but had not been able to find him, which is how he ended up in the area. She sympathized. But then the Marquis, looking at his watch, quickly stood up and said that it was time for him to go, and the widow understood this. The man, leaving his business card on the table, told the stranger that she could contact him for any reason. He wanted to thank her for her help. Suddenly, Margot, reaching out to pick up the business card, touched the gentleman's hand with her fingertips. Gracefully squeezing the business card between her fingers, the lady thanked the gentleman with a sly look. The Baron went out into the street to his carriage, and the girl, who remained sitting at the table, watched him through the window. She was still haunted by the tantalizing thought that Lopez had said his wife was crazy. The mother recalls that the Lopez family is not going through its best times, but it remains noble because the Marquis works in the diplomatic department of the royal palace. Smiling creepily, Margot thought that this man would be a better husband than Walter. She would not let Lopez leave because he mentioned that his wife was sick. The woman was very happy that luck was on her side and laughed, causing those around her to look at her with horror, as if she were crazy. One day the widow met the Marquis at his home, and sitting on his lap said that she missed him. He said with a smile that he missed her too. The lady asked if there was any risk of his wife seeing them, and the gentleman replied that she had gone with their daughter, which he was very glad about as her condition was getting worse. The man sighed heavily and admitted that he wanted to find a way to deal with his wife's madness. At that moment, Margot had an idea. She leaned towards the Marquis's ear and whispered that she might have a good solution, then asked if he wanted to know what it was. Immediately after this, the widow looked at the same servant with the burnt face who, as if nothing had happened, brought them tea. The mother recalls a recent conversation between the servant and her colleague, who was surprised that she stayed to work in the palace after being burned. Having overheard this, Margot only grinned, and not paying any attention to it, went on about her business. But now, without sliding off the Baron's lap and smilingly taking the cup in her hands, she says that the plan she has conceived should work. She throws a cup of hot tea right at the feet of the maid, with the mutilated face, causing her to fall to the floor with a deafening scream. But the widow, grabbing the frightened girl by the chin, told the Baron that there was a way to take care of his wife without staining their hands with blood. Soon after these events, Margot was heading to her new lover's house with her daughters. The Baroness had died, and she and her children were able to start a new life. The woman smiles frighteningly, realizing that this is all thanks to Petra Rahman Elenoa's mother, whose madness allowed the widow to become Baroness Lopez. A whole year had passed since these events. One sunny day, the stepmother's daughters teased little Elena by pulling her hair in the hallway. But suddenly, the poor thing who had already started to cry froze because she heard the crying of a baby coming from the room. It turns out that on this day, Margot gave birth to her third child, this time from the Marquis. The father took his son in his arms, and the mother asked if he was happy. Lopez smiled and told his wife that she was a great woman for giving birth to his heir. The man then turned to his maids and ordered them to take care of the Baroness, or else they would be punished. They bowed obediently and accepted the order. The Baron, handing the child over to his mother, suggested naming him Anthony, and the woman said it was a wonderful name. Lopez wanted a male successor, and with Anthony's birth, Margot was able to cement her position as Baroness. Anthony is her pride and joy, and so now that he is in debt trouble, she cannot give him up. She asks her son not to worry. Mom promised to find a way to get the money, but the guy, trembling with fear that they only had a month, asked if they could do it in that time. Suddenly, his stepmother shouted at him to pull himself together because he was the heir of Baron Lopez and should not allow these thoughts to upset him. Having calmed down a little, Margot, with her eyes wide open, added that they would find a way and asked her son to promise that he would stop gambling. He, still shaking, said that he would never touch them again. The Baroness wanted to be alone, and sitting down on the sofa in the living room, she thought she could not believe that her son had gotten into gambling debts. Nervously biting her fingernail, she thought that Viscount Zelen and his gang had forced her to do this, and they might cut off Anthony's hand if he didn't pay everything. Just then, a maid enters the room and tells her mistress that a letter has arrived for her. Taking the envelope in her hands, the stepmother saw that it was a telegram from Robert Anderson, the count she had met at the ball. The woman opened the letter, not even imagining what this man needed. But then, as soon as the stepmother read the text, she immediately laughed like a psychopath, which really scared the maid. In the letter, Anderson says that he has fallen in love with Ellen, who was at the ball. He is a widower, but is ready to offer a huge amount of money in exchange for her daughter's hand. Smiling frighteningly, Margot thought that everyone knew what a pervert Robert was, but this offer made her incredibly happy. The stepmother always knew that her useless stepdaughter would one day be useful to her. Meanwhile, the main character, with her head raised up and her mouth open, looked around the area she found herself in. To repay the debt to the Duke, she came to the royal castle, which was striking in its size and luxury. Her escort, coughing discontentedly, asked the lady not to stare and to follow him. She sheepishly agreed. The girl looked at everything with admiration. The palace turned out to be more beautiful than she had expected, and now the lady understood why it was considered an ice castle. As soon as the guest found herself inside the palace, she heard the whispering of the maids behind her. Ellen looked around in confusion, realizing that her appearance had caused the entire staff to be confused. The young lady had come to visit her master. The heroine's father gave her some money to go to the doctor, and she could have called a carriage, but she didn't, so she showed up at the palace all tired. The worker did this because she wanted to save this amount, and besides, her ankle does not hurt so much. Now she is not at all embarrassed by these stares and gossip about her, because she has been through much worse things. Finally, Cinderella, accompanied by the butler, arrived at the appointed office. The servant knocked and told his lordship that a girl had arrived to see him. Elinor stood aside, waiting to see what would happen. Enoch allowed the lady to enter, after which the doors opened, and the guest saw the Duke, who was sitting on the sofa, with a smile, sipping a strong drink. Suddenly, the doors behind Ellen closed sharply, which made her scared and embarrassed. Still trying to overcome her shyness, she remained standing, mentally begging not to be left alone with this man. Enoch leaned forward and asked Milady why she was standing there, then invited her to come over to him. She sighed and thought that the Duke was very arrogant. She thought that the gentleman was like that because he had been commanding people all his life. The protagonist obeyed his lordship and moved closer to him. Enoch, folding his arms across his chest, and raising an eyebrow in surprise, asked the girl why she wasn't sitting down. Milady replied that there was no need for that, since she had come to return his money for the trip. But before Ellen could finish speaking, the gentleman, casting an angry glance at her, ordered her to sit down immediately. The heroine sighed, sat down on the sofa, and then thanked the young man for helping her get home. Cinderella wanted to hand the man a bag of money that she owed, but he suddenly took out a single coin from there. Smiling, he looked at the 5-kopeck coin and asked the worker if she thought he had called her here only for this coin. Enoch threw the penny on the floor, and Eleanor watched in amazement as it rolled away. Then the girl was even more taken aback when Enoch suddenly stood up and grabbed her chin in his hand. Looking down at the embarrassed worker, the Duke asked if she worked at the Lopez residence. Hearing this, the main character realized that the master still thought that she was a servant, although in fact she was a legitimate member of the family. His lordship asked if she would mind working for him instead, saying that she would be better paid there, and he was sure she did not want to work for someone who treated her badly. The protagonist thought that it would be a tempting offer for her if she really worked as a servant for Baron Lopez. The girl also suddenly had a thought about whether this man still felt pity for her, but she decided that in any case, she no longer wanted him to look down on her the way others did. Gently removing the gentleman's hand from herself, the main character said that she would rather stay at the Lopez residence. Enoch scratched his head in surprise and asked the lady if she was a masochist, if she liked being treated like a slave. The lady, rising from the sofa, said that she had her own reasons for this and that it was time for her to go. Bowing her head before the gentleman, the girl thanked him for the pity he had shown her at the ball and for his help in the library. Then Ellen turned to leave, her wheat-colored hair fluttering in the air so gracefully that it made her look even more beautiful. The Duke seemed to be enchanted by this moment. He just stood and looked at the commoner. As if nothing had happened, the heroine approached the door and touched the handle. However, Milady did not have time to go out, as Enoch, approaching her from behind, blocked the door, pressing it with his hand. The girl asked what was going on. The young gentleman, touching Cinderella's shoulder with his fingers, said that he was not finished yet. The Duke reminded her that, as she had said, she did not want to work as a maid, then asked if she was interested in another job. The protagonist, overcome with excitement, said that it was not that important to her. But Enoch continued. She would receive 60,000 rupees a month in exchange for being his plaything. The man asked if she was interested now. The young man took a step forward, causing their bodies to now press closely together. Bending down to the girl's ear, the gentleman whispered that if she hadn't already understood, he was inviting her to become his mistress. Looking at Cinderella from behind, Enoch thought that she was quite interesting. She rejected his offer to hire her as a maid. The Duke thinks that the heroine looks like she will collapse at any moment, but still remains so cold. He wants to observe her closer. The man wants to see Cinderella break under his influence. He puts his arm around her waist and asks her what she thinks of his proposal. The heroine, removing the man's hand from her waist, wanted to address him as "you" at first, but corrected herself in time, switching to a respectful form of speech. The girl turned to him and asked him how often he had mistresses without even knowing their names first. His lordship was taken aback and asked Milady what her name was, and she introduced herself, thinking that he had been walking for a long time up to this point. Enoch sighed silently, because he couldn't believe that his head was turned by some nameless girl. The protagonist said that she has no idea how to behave modestly, how to spend money, and has no experience in bed, so she cannot be a concubine. Eleanor imagined herself in this role. Richly dressed, heavy with jewelry, she asked the gentleman if he thought this was a good idea. He, putting his hand on the door, said that she didn't need to pretend to be modest, and besides, the more you spend, the more you get used to it. Milady became agitated and shook her head, but the Duke, squeezing her chin with his fingers, turned her towards him. Looking the beauty in the eyes, the young man added that as for what happens in the bedroom, she doesn't need to make any effort, because he will teach her everything. The gentleman and the commoner stood frozen opposite each other, their lips ready to meet in a kiss at any moment. But suddenly there was a knock on the door, and the embarrassed Cinderella shuddered in fear. His lordship sighed in irritation and asked what was wrong, to which the servant on the other side of the door replied that Lady Arkwood had arrived to see him. The Duke took a step back, and the heroine remained standing at the aisle. He angrily asked why she was there, and the subordinate said that she had urgent business. Suddenly, the doors behind Ellen opened, and a joyful Penelope greeted the Duke. But here, besides Enoch, who greeted her with a stern look, the lady saw a certain girl. The lady asked who it was. Mr. Byron, clenching his jaw, told his guest that she could go and that his offer still stood. The main character obeyed, silently, walked around Penelope and walked towards the exit. Her Grace, looking after her with bewilderment, thought about what had just happened. She felt some strange atmosphere. Then the girl entered the room and saw Enoch frowning, lighting his pipe. Penelope was surprised that he still hadn't quit smoking and asked him to at least think about the health of his lungs. The man, continuing to enjoy his tobacco, asked Lady Arkwood to leave, since he had not invited her here. The girl, throwing an irritated glance at him, said that they hadn't even started the conversation, and he was already so nasty. Sitting down on the sofa, Penelope asked her friend who that girl was, since she had not seen her before in his palace. The Duke wanted to say that it was none of her business, but the lady suddenly cried out that this commoner was very similar to the lady with whom he danced at the ball. Enoch asked her to finally stop this and asked why she had come. She, calling him a fool, put a document on the table, a marriage contract. The young man asked what she meant by this. The lady said that they are both under pressure to get married, and she wants them to pretend to be married and then split up after 3 years. With a coquettish wink, the young lady added that she would be happy to give him a child if he wished he would become the next Duke of Arkwood. Enoch, barely holding back his anger, thought that this lady had completely lost her mind. He said they wouldn't do that, to which Penelope indignantly asked, why not, if that was the only way to get rid of her parents. The girl then asked the man if he wanted his own successor, but the Duke firmly stated that he would never marry her or anyone else. Then the lady asked with a grin if it was not because of that lady who had just left, and said that she did not know that he liked such girls. Her ladyship wondered aloud if Enoch liked commoners in trouble, but he angrily asked her to stop talking nonsense and leave. But suddenly, Lady Arkwood's question made the Duke start. She asked whether he would agree if she asked him to marry her. He smirked and asked why he had to do that at all. Immediately after his words, Penelope's ringing laughter was heard. The lady told her friend that she felt sorry for the girl who would marry him and spend the rest of her life with him. The lady smiled sweetly, but taunted the man with the phrase that he only had a pretty face. After this, Madame turned around, telling his lordship that she would finally leave him alone for today. The girl headed for the exit, but pausing at the door, added that she hoped that one day the day would come when he would regret his arrogance. Turning to the man with a smile, she asked him to remember her words. When this day melts away, it will laugh in his face. The young man did not answer, but merely smoked his pipe, fixing his frightening gaze on her. Throwing his cigarette on the floor, Enoch ordered his servant to prepare hunting equipment for him. Having saddled his horse, the young gentleman rode at full speed into the forest, with a gun in his hands. As soon as the horned game appeared from the bushes, the man took aim with his rifle, after which a deafening shot rang out. The butler, stopping in front of the king's desk, informs him that Enoch has refused to collect the game he was hunting and has caused a commotion. His Highness is disappointed that his brother is doing this again. He is the best soldier in the kingdom, but he sometimes goes too far. Of course, this is precisely the reason why he is so popular among the people of Freydon, but his brother cannot allow this to continue. Hounds need to be kept on a leash to prevent them from biting their owner's hand. So Henry believes that marriage would be the perfect leash for Enoch. The ruler asked the servant to send a message to Marquis Philo, because they must hurry with the wedding. The subordinate asked if he really wanted to contact the Marquise, and not Penelope. The king remained silent, and the butler said he would do as he was told. The gentleman rose from his chair, thinking that he needed Philon to keep Enoch under control, since marriage was a bargaining tool for the nobility. Looking out the window, Henry hopes that Enoch understands this, and that it will be better for both of them. The main character lies calmly on the bed, with her pet looking at the ceiling. The girl remembers the moment when Enoch, clinging to her from behind, asks her with a smile what she thinks about his proposal. Turning over onto her other side, Eleanor felt embarrassed that she still couldn't get it out of her head. She tries to think about something else, but she can't forget that moment when their lips almost touched. The worker was enraged by all this, and jumping out of bed, she screamed and ordered these memories to leave her alone. The protagonist has locked herself in her room to avoid running into her family. Taking a walk is out of the question. But then Cinderella heard someone knocking on her door. She got up from her bed and asked who it was. It turned out to be the stepmother, who told her stepdaughter that they needed to talk. Opening the door, Eleanor looked at Margot's face in bewilderment and asked what was the matter. She oddly enough smiled and happily said that they needed to take a walk somewhere. The heroine immediately suspected something was wrong, because usually her stepmother pulls her hair when she is idle in her room like today. The woman added that they needed to go to a fitting at the boutique, then asked her daughter to get ready for the trip, because they had to be back before dinner. The protagonist said that she did not understand anything, when suddenly the Baroness warmly took her hands and said that she was already in the prime of life, and it was time to get married. Ellen couldn't believe her ears, almost lost her jaw. The girl asked in shock what it meant. Later, Cinderella, looking at her reflection in the mirror, wonders why Margot suddenly started talking about marriage, and in all seriousness. The girl recalls how the Baroness said that now she would often appear in high society, and she was not allowed to walk around like that. Milady can't shake the feeling that there's a catch here. Her family doesn't have enough money to provide her with a dowry, so this isn't the best option. Although Eleanor doesn't know why she is being rushed into marriage, she decides that no matter what, she will hope that her future husband will be normal. She'll be fine until her chosen one turns out to be someone like Count Anderson. Suddenly, the stepmother burst into the room with Helen, who asked Ellen why she was taking so long to get ready. She immediately ran to them. Soon the Lopez family's carriage arrived in the city on one of the most beautiful streets. Ellen was very surprised when she realized that they had arrived at the most famous boutique in the capital. This place is popular among young and rich ladies. The young worker never thought that she would ever cross the threshold of this place. Margot asked the girl if she was worried about the prices, then said that she shouldn't worry because her deceased mother left her some money. Cinderella looked at her stepmother with confusion, thinking that it turned out that her father was hiding the inheritance that her mother left, since she never knew about it. Ellen's mother didn't leave her much, but her father took the money from his daughter, saying he needed it to manage the estate, and her stepmother and Helen took what was left. The only thing the protagonist has left behind as an inheritance is a necklace with a white topaz and a tattered diary written in another language. She also inherited a precious box from her mother. There is no key to it, and no matter how hard the heroine tries to open it, she is unsuccessful. Cinderella remembers how her mother, when giving her this box, said that she should not show it to anyone, and it would be better to hide it so that no one would find it. The woman stroked her daughter's cheek and added that she could only open it if she found herself in a difficult situation. Now the girl remembers that her mother often became furious, but at that moment, when she said that it was her gift, she seemed to be herself. Ellen wondered why she had told her this, but then her stepmother called out to her, asking her not to be daydreaming and to walk faster. The young ladies entered the store and stopped near the stand with elegant dresses. Margot pulled out an elegant red dress and showed it to her stepdaughter admiringly, saying that it suited her very well. But the main character was embarrassed because she did not share the Baroness's opinion. For her, this dress looked too pretentious. Suddenly, a certain rich lady entered the boutique and upon seeing the Lopez women, exclaimed in surprise. It turned out to be Iris Philoane, who, noticing Eleanor, asked what brought her there. Cinderella wanted to say hello, but suddenly Margot screamed at the top of her voice how good it was for Iris to come here. Miss Philoane told the woman that she hadn't known she was there, that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and that she hoped she was doing well. She smiled and said yes. The Baroness suggested that the nice lady sit down somewhere and talk, to which she agreed, after which the stepmother, forgetting about her stepdaughter, left. Taking a table, Iris was surprised that she brought Ellen here and not Helen and Melissa. The girl asked if anyone had asked for her hand, to which she replied that not really, but the Baron was eager to woo her. Miss Philoane glanced sideways at Ellen when the woman said that her stepdaughter needed new evening dresses because she couldn't wear the same thing. The heroine, meanwhile, looked at the assortment of clothes, but the young lady could notice the sleeve of her shirt, which really looked worn. The stepmother happily asked the girl if she was by any chance planning a wedding with Count Fontes, adding that they were a wonderful couple. She smiled sheepishly and said that no, they were just childhood friends, and their parents were just joking about marriage. Margot laughed and said it was very sweet, while Ellen, to whom she was completely oblivious, looked embarrassed. Iris, smiling modestly, shared with the Baroness that the truth was that her family had discussed marriage with another family. The protagonist, hearing this, perked up her ears, and Margot asked what kind of family this was. Philoane whispered to the woman that it was a secret that should remain only between them, then said that they were discussing the matter of marriage with the Duke of Bayern. Eleanor suddenly flinched and turned back with her eyes wide and her mouth open. But suddenly, the worker, lowering her head, wondered why she was so surprised when she heard this. The girl understands that Iris was born into a respected noble family, and she is more worthy of becoming a duchess. Cinderella realizes that this matter does not concern her at all, but for some reason her hand is shaking, and she herself cannot calm down her excitement. Margot jerked in shock and asked the lady if this was really true. She, putting her index finger to her lips, said that it would be better for her to remain silent until there was an official announcement. The stepmother, hiding her smile, offered Iris her congratulations, then admitted that she could not believe that Helen's friend would become the Duchess of Bayern. But then she tells Philoane that in order for her daughter to play the role of her close friend, she must find a good husband for her. The young lady confided to the woman that Marquis Philoane would soon be holding a party, and that she would like to invite her and her friend. The girl promised to inform her father about it. The Baroness was very pleased about this, saying that she would be very grateful. Iris said that when she became a duchess, she would like Helen to be with her. But Ellen, hearing this, realized that she was lying. The main character knows that Philoane does not consider her sister as his friend. She just needs someone as a maid of honor. Soon, stepmother and Iris finished their conversation, and the Lopez girls left the boutique, where the store owner politely said goodbye to them. Margot kept blabbering on about how this was the reason why this boutique was the most popular in the city, but the protagonist didn't listen to her at all. Ellen assumes that the king has decided to find a wife for his brother, but she didn't think it would happen so soon. The girl wondered whether Enoch even knew about her future engagement. But then her stepmother pulled her out of her thoughts, calling out to her sternly and saying that she had been daydreaming lately. The woman suggested that her daughter look into a shoe and jewelry store because she needed some of it for new dresses. Eleanor thought that she understood the need for new shoes, but not for jewelry. Her mother didn't leave that much money for new trinkets. The protagonist became increasingly convinced that something was wrong. The girls then went to a jewelry store where they looked at some of the jewelry. Margot showed her stepdaughter a beautiful gold earring with a beautiful orange amber and asked her if she liked it. As soon as the main character looked at this jewel, Enoch's eyes, which were of the same rich color, immediately popped into her memory. But Ellen suddenly became embarrassed and wondered why she had remembered him so suddenly. She told her stepmother that she liked the pearls they had looked at earlier better. She raised an eyebrow and said that pearl jewelry made a girl look older than she actually was. The Baroness's words echoed in Ellen's head. She didn't think pure gold suited her anyway. The protagonist again remembered the intense gaze of Enoch's amber eyes and how he told her that he was offering her to become his lover. The hard worker thought sadly that her stepmother was right after all. It really didn't suit her. How here the woman and the commoner met their friend Iris again. She looked at them in surprise and asked what they were doing there. Margot laughed at the coincidence that they had to meet again and wished her to find something she liked in the store, after which she said goodbye. Just as the heroine was about to leave, Philoane called out to her and asked her to spare a minute. Iris, while choosing decorations on the table, told the commoner that she was sure that she did not know much about high society. Taking the bracelet in her hand, she handed it to Ellen and asked why she didn't try it on, adding that she wouldn't find a husband looking like that. Cinderella felt awkward because she heard the servants whispering, laughing, comparing her to a pig, that they decided to put a precious ornament on. Iris herself put a bracelet on Lopez's hand, saying that she hoped that she would meet her husband, but Lopez jerked her hand and said that it was not worth it. Suddenly, Philoane, looking angrily straight into Milady's eyes, asked her not to behave like a fool. Then she, smiling frighteningly and squeezing the heroine's hand, asked her to accept this decoration from her as a gift. The day passed quickly, and Eleanor, getting ready for bed, decided to lie down on the bed and look at her new bracelet. She thought about how expensive this piece of jewelry was, and she was sure that Iris had given it to her with a hidden meaning, although perhaps this was typical of ladies. The worker recalls that Philoane always treated her with contempt, but she would occasionally do good deeds for her like today. She's full of it. She believes in helping people in need. When Ellen was little, she thought she had good intentions. Cinderella was so absorbed in thinking about how Iris was a hypocrite that she didn't notice how the bracelet in her hand was stolen by someone who quickly ran past. This is her pet Lucy, who in a fit of play snatched the jewelry from her and held it in her teeth. Ellen immediately rushed to her, asking her to spit it out, because she might accidentally swallow it. But then the girl froze because she heard the door in her room creak. Margot appeared in the doorway and angrily asked her daughter what she was doing at such a late hour, when she had to get up early tomorrow anyway. Having called the worker useless, the woman left, and the heroine just wanted to ask the cat to be quieter when she noticed that it had disappeared somewhere. The girl began to look for it around the room, but suddenly her toe touched a piece of the bracelet. Ellen managed to find Lucy in the closet, but she was horrified because the cat had torn apart her newly purchased bracelet. The mistress said disappointedly that this was why she didn't want her to play with it. Milady began to look at the animal's mouth, checking that she hadn't swallowed anything. Fluffy didn't like the fact that someone was rummaging around in her mouth, so she started wagging her tail in displeasure, for which Cinderella apologized to him. But then the main character noticed what the cat's tail was hitting: her precious box. The girl took the thing in her hands, thinking that she had completely forgotten about it. The worker became interested in what was inside it. Looking at the expensive box, the heroine remembers that her mother could barely take care of herself because of her illness, and Ellen finds it hard to believe that she could leave her an inheritance. The protagonist shook the box, wondering if there might be money in it. Cinderella dropped the box sharply, which scared her cat. Milady thought that here was her inheritance, but she could not open it and find out. The worker, seeing that Lucy's fur stood on end, stroked her and said that everything was fine. But then the main character remembered that if there was anything that was bothering her, it was one detail. In the past, she asked her father about her mother's inheritance, saying that she had heard about it but didn't know what to do with it. The man sighed tiredly and told his daughter that she didn't have to worry because her stepmother would take care of it, which surprised her. The girl putting the box back in the closet thinks that something is wrong. Margot has never shown such attention, and her father avoids the topic. Eleanor understands that only time will tell. It will reveal their true intentions and perhaps even the contents of her box. The next day, another ball was held in the royal palace, to which many noble gentlemen came. The stepmother and Ellen also came to this event and were solemnly introduced by the butler. The latter felt insecure. She adjusted her new dress because she was uncomfortable in it. The other guests at the banquet saw the Baroness laughed and began to discuss her among themselves. The woman was very angry that they dared to treat her like that and ignore her just because she was a commoner. Noticing that her stepdaughter was constantly adjusting her dress, Margot hit her hand with her fan and angrily ordered her to stop fidgeting. Mrs. Lopez reminded the girl that she needed to stand up straight, like a proper lady, for which she apologized to hurry. But Ellen thought that her stepmother herself was not behaving like a real lady, swearing in all directions and powdering herself at every step. Looking at the jewelry she was wearing, Cinderella thought that she had never worn anything more beautiful and fashionable before. Following this, Milady remembered that she and her stepmother had arrived at the ball in a new carriage. As soon as the daughter saw the new vehicle, she asked her stepmother in bewilderment where it came from and whether she had received it along with her inheritance. She, smiling venomously, told the worker that her mother was the daughter of a rich merchant, so she left her a certain payment. Eleanor said that now everything was clear to her, but in fact it was not so, because on the contrary, it seemed strange to her. Now the protagonist is thinking that her mother could never have left so much money, and even if she had her father and wife, would have already spent it. Suddenly, Margot, pointing somewhere to the side, suggests that her daughter go there because she wants to introduce her to someone. But when the heroine wanted to ask with whom, the woman grabbing Ellen by the hand said that they already knew each other and they needed to go quickly. Cinderella had no choice but to follow the Baroness, wondering who this man was that she had already met. Eleanor remembered moments where her stepmother reminded her at every opportunity that her husband would have liked it, which made the girl feel uneasy. Finally, Mrs. Lopez stumbles upon the right man, Count Anderson, whom she calls out joyfully. He turns to them with a frightening grin. The man, his arms outstretched in happiness, walked towards them, telling the ladies that he was very glad to meet them. The Count leaned over to the young lady and asked if he could call her simply Eleanor. The old man's cheeks turned red, and he told the girl enthusiastically that he never thought she could look so good. The main character's hair stood on end when the man laughed and added that she was worth every cent he paid. The stepmother said that if there was one good thing about Eleanor, it was her looks. He, licking his lips, agreed, because she looked even more gorgeous in that dress. Then the woman, noticing that her daughter was silent, said that she should come up and greet Anderson properly, because he spent a lot of money on her. Ellen, shaking with rage, clenched her hands into fists when her stepmother shouted that the Earl had paid for the jewelry she was wearing, and she should be grateful. The girl looked at Margot with a cold gaze. Cinderella realized that she was even more insidious than she actually was. The protagonist clenched her jaw in anger, because her stepmother knew that she would refuse if she immediately took her to the Count and decided to make her a debtor, and even dared to use her mother as an excuse. Eleanor calmly told Anderson that he shouldn't do that, which left the man and Mrs. Lopez dumbfounded. Throwing her jewelry on the floor, the girl added that if he had paid for her clothes and jewelry, she would have worn rags to the ball. The worker bowed to the Count, saying that, unfortunately, she did not want to be in his debt, so her stepmother would be happy to reimburse him for all expenses. The stepmother flared up with rage. She menacingly asked the girl how she dared to speak like that. But then Anderson indignantly told Margot that he thought they understood each other well, because she said that she had settled everything with Lady Eleanor. The man's screams drew the attention of the people around him. He angrily asked the woman if she considered him a fool if she dared to deceive him like that. The stepmother said that there was a misunderstanding and began to play to the crowd. Madame asked her daughter why she was lying if she said that she loved the Count. The Baroness grabbed Ellen by the shoulders and began to shake her, ordering her to say at least something. But suddenly, the transparent veil that adorned the girl's shoulders fell to the floor due to the woman's sharp movements. The guests at the banquet, seeing this, were very surprised and began to whisper among themselves. Eleanor, trying to cover her cleavage angrily, asked her stepmother to stop wondering where her manners had gone. Margot suddenly heard those around her talking about how they knew she would show her true colors yet, and that she was just lucky to have hooked up with a worthy nobleman. Enoch himself shows up at the event, perplexed as to why there is such a commotion here. His friend Warren immediately runs up to him and asks him where he was since he missed all the drama. The Duke saw his friend's delighted face and asked why he was so pleased. Having led his friend closer to the scene of events, the Marquis asked him to look there, and Byron, irritated by his behavior, asked what was going on there. Warren, pointing his finger at Ellen, who was shivering with cold, asked if this was the lady with whom he had danced at the ball. The man looked at the girl in bewilderment and wondered what she was doing here. The gentleman already reflexively wanted to take off his jacket to cover Cinderella's shoulders with it, since she was essentially almost naked. But suddenly, he stopped short and froze, catching himself wondering what he wanted to do right now. Then he decided to stand aside and light a cigar, thinking that it wasn't that he didn't care about this lady. He had no need to interfere. As he watches the drama unfold, Warren tells his friend that it seems Anderson wanted Ellen to be his wife, but she knew nothing about it. Looking at the Baroness, who was trembling all over, the Marquis added that it seemed that she was forcing her stepdaughter to marry him under pressure. Enoch, smoking his cigar, realized that Baroness Lopez was the girl's stepmother. His lordship asked his friend if the blonde was a maid, to which he asked in surprise what he was talking about. The young Duke immediately recalls the moment when Eleanor rejected his proposal, saying that she would rather stay at the Lopez residence. Enoch chuckled, thinking that this girl was the Baron's daughter, and yet she lied to him about working as a maid. The gentleman said with a satisfied smile that the situation was very interesting, to which his friend asked in fear what had suddenly come over him. Warren told his friend that Margot was the Baron's second wife, and that there was a notorious rumor going around about him. The guy says he's talking about how someone saw this woman enter the Lopez residence the day after the first wife died. And before the end of the month, the Baron and Margot were married. It happened so quickly after the death of his first wife that everyone thought the man had gone mad. The Marquis added that this woman even brought children from a previous marriage, but Enoch suddenly asked what caused the death of his previous wife. Warren scratched his cheek in embarrassment, laughing that of all the amazing things he had told Enoch, had asked about this. He says that the former Baroness Lopez was from Qatar. She was half Qatari, half Freudian. There was a rumor that Qatari women were prone to madness. The Marquise whispered in Enoch's ear that the girl was slowly going crazy, and eventually they say she committed suicide. His lordship realized that Cinderella's mother had committed suicide. Cinderella had been through a lot at such a young age, and she had a nasty stepmother. The main character has no choice but to marry Count Anderson, and this does not concern the Duke himself. However, the man who is finishing his cigar still cannot shake off the strange feeling. Meanwhile, Anderson, swinging his hand at the unfortunate girl, angrily asked how she dared to mock him like that. The protagonist was already preparing to feel pain, but suddenly, someone stopped the Count, squeezing his hand. Enoch, covering the frightened lady with his jacket, asked what she was doing there anyway. Eleanor looked into the eyes of her savior, while he, lightly touching her hair, said that she had not warned that she would come. Silence reigned in the hall. The guests of the banquet, observing the situation from the side, began to spread rumors that this lady was Mr. Byron's mistress. The main character froze in bewilderment, thinking that she had not expected such a turn of events at all. Anderson, rubbing his palm, looked at his would-be bride in bewilderment, while those around him chattered about Eleanor, being the lady with whom the Duke had danced at the ball. The excited stepmother heard the nobles say that her stepdaughter was meeting with His Highness. This made the woman angry because she knows that everything is wrong, and Enoch would not even look at Ellen in a loving way, and she was just lucky to dance with him. In order to find out everything as quickly as possible, she turned to the young man, saying that she wanted to tell him some news, but she didn't yet know if it was true. The protagonist and the Duke were stunned when the Baroness told the latter that he would soon be engaged to Lady Falone. Mr. Byron was filled with rage because he realized that apparently his brother had some aces up his sleeve. However, he calmed his anger and looked softly at Cinderella, thinking that it was all a lie. The girl, shocked by her stepmother's words, also looked the man straight in the eyes. Enoch squeezed his fingers, in which he held the fragile palm of the Baron's daughter. Meanwhile, the guests gossiped about how they didn't believe that Marquis Philoane would agree to the engagement, and that now was not the right time for such news. How as soon as Margot thought about what she had just done, the hair on her head stood on end with fear. Enoch, approaching her, sternly declared that he did not know anything of what he had heard from her, and therefore asked her to explain. The woman, trembling all over and stuttering over every word, muttered to the gentleman that this was not what she meant to say. The stepmother wondered if it was possible that Iris had lied to her about the engagement, which she could not believe. But then the Baroness remembers Philoane's words, where she advises her to remain silent until there is an official announcement. Margot was no longer able to stand on her feet when she realized what a catastrophic mistake she had made. Madame rolled her eyes and fell to the floor unconscious, and a frightened Ellen called out to her. Later, 3 ladies discussing what happened say that it was something to disgrace oneself in public like that. One of them asks what happened to the Baroness after she fainted. Another lady said that servants came and carried her to the carriage, where the excited Ellen went home with hers. One of the girls added that now they knew one truth. Lady Lopez was the Baron's legitimate daughter. And another truth is that she is now the most talked about person in town. Walking down the corridor late at night, the heroine remembers that her stepmother spent several hours unconscious even after they returned to the estate. But soon after this, a maid knocked on her door and told her that her father had called her to him. Stopping at her father's office, the protagonist thought that she was sure that he wanted to discuss with her the case related to Count Anderson. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor knocked on the door, and the Baron, hearing this, allowed her to enter. As soon as Cinderella entered, she saw her father at his desk, laying out a chess set in front of him. The man told his daughter that he had heard about what had happened at the ball, and was sure that she understood why he had called her to him at such a late hour. She didn't answer her dad in any way. She just prepared to listen to his reason. The Baron, moving a piece on the chessboard, told Ellen that he wanted her to marry Count Anderson. The most important goal in life for Baron Lopez was to maintain his family line. He no longer has any estates, so he decided to live in a manor in the capital, which is why people point fingers at him. But still, my father is proud of the fact that he had a noble family in the past. Therefore, the Baron really wants an heir to pass on his bloodline. But his mother rejected him after Ellen was born, which is why they often quarreled. Maybe that's why Baron Lopez insisted on marrying Margot as soon as the heroine's mother died, and it looked like he was waiting for her to die. The protagonist only wants to say that her father and stepmother do not love each other. The latter was only a means for the man to achieve his goal. Not understanding what to do, now Eleanor moved the white piece on the chessboard with trembling hands. Raising her head with confidence, the girl told her father that it turned out that he only saw her as a profitable marriage and not as his own daughter. He stood up, went to the window, and said that he didn't understand what she was talking about, and that he heard that she had embarrassed Anderson, so he should apologize. Ellen paused, thinking that she knew her father didn't care about her, but she didn't want him dragging her through the mud again. She doesn't understand how he can think of marrying his daughter to a twisted old man like Count Anderson. Cinderella cannot answer him for all the insults that happened because of him, but she will not allow him to control her destiny. The heroine firmly told her father that she would not do this. He sipping cognac shuddered when he heard this behind your back. The man turned around puzzled and asked his daughter what she had just said. She repeated that she did not want to marry Count Anderson. The lady explained that he was much older than her and had not hesitated to raise his hand to her during the gala ball, and that in general he was a terrible and vile person. The Baron slammed his glass on the table and asked angrily how she dared to speak to him like that. Shouting at the top of his lungs, the man reminded his daughter that he was the head of the family and her father, so she should know her place and do as she was told. The heroine, without losing her courage, confessed to her father that she did not want to mention it again, but she knew that her mother saved the Lopez family from bankruptcy, and in addition, she was also the granddaughter of the Rahman family. The Baron's anger knew no bounds. He silently gave Ellen a strong slap in the face. Cinderella looked at him in shock, rubbing her cheek, which had become red from the blow. The father, shaking off his hand, said that he was sure that she had been just as impudent at the party yesterday. Grabbing his daughter by the throat, the man furiously added that it was because of her that he had to officially apologize to Count Licus and his wife. Throwing the girl to the floor, the father admitted that he had not thought she was so ungrateful. He wondered if this was how the Cathar blood manifested itself in her. The protagonist silently gathered all her courage and strength into a fist because she couldn't just retreat. The Baron turned around, puzzled, and asked what she meant when Eleanor asked, what if she found a more suitable husband for herself? Cinderella continued, he must have already heard that the Duke of Bayern was interested in her, although one might think that it was only out of pity. Ellen explained that she was a more valuable daughter than Helen and Melissa, and if he gave her a week, she would find someone who would restore Lopez to her former glory. The father agreed, emphasizing that if she did not find a worthy groom within a week, she would marry Count Anderson without question. After talking to her dad, the main character returned to her room and sat down tiredly on the floor. She doesn't know what to do now, but she believes that she will find a way. But then she notices her pet Lucy, who came to her and meowed. Suddenly, the cat jumps right next to the girl's face, which frightens her. The animal climbed onto its owner's shoulders and began to rub against her neck. Cinderella thought that she looked very cute. Eleanor smiled, stroked the cat, and admitted to her that she was the only one who took care of her in this family, for which she thanked her. The next day, another ball was held at the palace, where the guests eagerly read the newspaper with the news that the two-faced beauty had charmed Enoch Bayerns. The news of the Duke's new mistress spread throughout the capital, so at the banquet everyone had a newspaper where they read the details. One man asked his friend if she had read the article, and she replied that she had. Then the gentleman told the woman in surprise that they said that Eleanor would be attending today's party as well, and that she was in fact already here. It really was like this. The heroine stood with a glass of wine, as if nothing had happened, when suddenly a lady with red hair pushed her on the shoulder. It turned out to be her sister Helen, who chuckled and said that she should watch where she was going. The man and the lady watching this assumed that Ellen was the ugly duckling in her family, having only recently joined the society, and perhaps she had a hidden agenda, as the newspaper article suggested. Another man on the balcony watched as they said that this girl had definitely stirred up the press, and that she apparently enjoyed being in the public eye. A young man named Felix Werner, looking at the gossips, angrily crumpled the newspaper, deciding that this article was complete rubbish. He threw the paper on the floor, where it fell at the feet of another gentleman, who was just walking towards him. The man, picking up the crumpled piece of paper and reading the news about the two-faced beauty, told his friend in surprise that he didn't think he was reading the press. The friend patted Felix on the shoulder and asked him with a grin if he was interested in this lady by chance, to which he wearily asked him to stop it. But immediately after this, Werner turned his gaze back to Cinderella and saw how a certain gentleman began to force himself on her. The man asked the lady if she liked scarves, to which the girl said that everything was fine and that she had her own. Seeing this picture, Felix, without looking away, jumped up from his chair in fear, and his friend rolled his eyes. But Werner sighed and sat down, wondering what he was doing. Watching Eleanor bored at the ball, the guy wondered what kind of feelings this lady was evoking in him. A few days later, the protagonist was in a bad mood, because from the moment she entered high society, Helen could not leave her alone. The redhead literally stalked her half-sister furiously, asking her why she thought she could find herself a decent husband. This happens all the time, and it really irritates Ellen, but compared to what she's been through, it doesn't affect her, so she just runs away from her sister. Hiding from her in the corridor, the worker remembers that Helen always treated her like this, so she got used to it, but she is more worried about something else. The girl wanted to calmly catch her breath after the escape, but then Melissa, who had been spying on her, peeked out from the corner. She is different from her sister, who can be read like an open book. It is impossible to guess what is on Melissa's mind. However, the main character has much more important things to do than her stepsisters, such as a mysterious box that she is struggling to open. Eleanor was terribly tired and dropped her hands, realizing that she could not open it. She tried everything she could, prying the lid with a pin and chipping it with a hammer, but nothing worked. But then the lady remembers her mother's words, where she says that only being between a hammer and an anvil will she be able to open this box. Now, Cinderella really is in a situation between a hammer and a hard place, but she began to think hard about how to open it. Suddenly, the girl remembered something and began to rummage through the drawer of her desk, because if you think about it, her mother left her not only this box. Finally, she finds what she was looking for: an expensive notebook with a red cover, her mother's personal diary. Ellen sat on her bed with the diary. She had no idea what it said because it was all in Cathar, which her mother spoke. The heroine realizes that she could have read it if her father had not forbidden her to learn the Cathar language in childhood. Whenever her mother tried to teach her daughter her native language, he vehemently objected. Cinderella was overcome with fear. There were only 4 days left until the end of her term, and at this rate, she would have no choice but to marry Anderson. The girl trembled and bowed her head mentally, asking her mother to help her somehow. The mother always told her daughter that she should marry a man from a noble family so that no one would dare to look down on her. But the heroine does not want this. Elena was overcome with sadness, which made her squeeze the page of her mother's diary with her fingers. Then the girl noticed a certain detail. 2 pages in the notebook were glued together. The protagonist tried to separate them, suggesting that there might be something hidden between them, and her guesses turned out to be right. She found a small note that spoke about her box, and in a language she understood. The worker read the lines: "For the sake of the one who may never return, I am ready to wait forever," and thought that there was something encrypted here. She guessed that these words symbolize a flower, astilbe, which is what is said below. To open the box, you need to put it to the keyhole. The main character gasped in shock because she had finally found a way to open this mysterious box. Eleanor went into town where she asked various flower sellers if they had white astilbe, but they all said they did not. Walking along the street with stalls, the lady sighed sadly because she could not find the necessary plant here. She did not think that it would be so difficult. Cinderella visited every single florist, but none of them had astilbe, so she had one last hope: the Royal Botanic Garden. Ellen remembered that sometimes it was closed to visitors, but pulling herself together, she decided to try her luck because she had no other choice, and now she was ready to seize any opportunity. Once at the gates of the garden, the girl read the sign that it would be open to visitors until Friday at 1700, which made her very happy. The lady was comforted by the fact that she could still get inside, but she understood that everything could not be so simple. While walking through the Brios Botanical Garden, Cinderella remembers that there is an abundance of exotic plants here, and she hopes that she will find what she needs. Suddenly, the heroine's gaze falls on a flower bed where flowers grew that were very similar to those she was looking for. Ellen's jaw nearly dropped when she realized that she had finally found a white astilbe. But the girl became serious and decided that now she needed to somehow pick a couple of branches because she could be caught red-handed and arrested. She climbed into the flower bed, motivated by the fact that going to jail no longer seemed like a worse outcome compared to the prospect of marrying a pervert. Ellen had already begun to pick the necessary branches when she noticed something strange in the depths of the flower bed. Having made her way further, the lady realized that Enoch, whom she accidentally climbed on top of, was sleeping here. Cinderella does not understand what he is doing here. Suddenly, the young man, feeling some discomfort in his sleep, sleepily opened his eyes. In front of him, he saw Ellen, who with her mouth open looked straight into his eyes. Miss Lopez immediately pulled away from him, sheepishly saying that she had accidentally tripped and fallen right on top of him, for which she apologized. His lordship wondered how she could have tripped in such a place, but noticing the flowers next to him, he smiled because he understood what was going on. Then the main character notices two guards who appeared very close to her, while the girl was frantically thinking about what to do, because if she was noticed it was all over. Mr. Byron suddenly grabbed her hand and pulled her towards him. A rustling sound was heard from the bushes, which attracted the attention of the two guards. Deciding that they were just imagining things, the guys decided to ignore it and move on. The main character managed to remain unnoticed, thanks to her savior, who hid her among the flowers, hugging her. Enoch grinned and asked the lady to admit that she liked it, to which Cinderella sheepishly replied that it was not so at all. The Duke, presenting his index finger before the lips of the beauty, asked her to be quieter if she did not want to be caught, and she immediately fell silent. The young man was so amused by the girl's stupid face that he burst out laughing. The protagonist, watching the gentleman laugh involuntarily, blushed. But Enoch suddenly asked seriously why she was looking at him so intently, as if she had never seen a man laugh. The man told the lady that she, on the contrary, should be glad that she had fallen on him, then gently reminded her that this was in fact the second time. Cinderella said it wasn't on purpose, to which the Duke replied that it was a very convenient excuse. The heroine can't believe she's hearing something like that from him. The man, smiling slyly, suggested that she seemed to be taking everything from their sudden meetings. Suddenly, Eleanor pushes his lordship away from her, pushing him with her hands into his chest, on which a noticeable scar was visible. The worker sternly told the master that everything was not like that at all, and that he had been pretending the last time. But Enoch, without changing his smile, said that it did help, to which she remained silent. Rising to his feet, the Duke asked the girl if she had thought about his proposal, to which the lady boldly replied that there was nothing to think about. Mr. Byron, squeezing the girl's chin with his fingers, asked her to stop playing hard to get. Ellen frowned and blushed, and Enoch, letting her go, and walking out of the flower bed, asked what brought her there. The lady looked away in embarrassment and said that she just wanted to admire the flowers here. Then Ellen asked what he was doing there. Enoch smiled at how quickly Ellen changed the subject. The man said it was his way of escaping. There was a charity event not far from here, but he was tired of such events, and no one comes to this greenhouse, so he took a nap here. Eleanor giggled, trying to hide her smile with her hand, because the Duke reminded her of a kitten looking for secluded, sunny places to sleep. The young man, seeing the girl's reaction, looked at her in bewilderment and raised an eyebrow. Enoch then asked her if she had come there to steal these flowers, to which she replied fearfully that she had not. Byron repeated that he was not mistaken, but Cinderella still insisted that it was not so. Then the gentleman asked her what kind of flowers were in her hand. The man added with a grin that he had noticed them from the very beginning, and then the main character gave in, shamefully bowing her head down. The Duke asked her if she liked the flowers she had picked, to which she replied that one could say so. The next moment, Enoch bent down in front of the beauty and reached for the flowers that were on her back. Having plucked a few branches and handed them to the lady, he said that he liked them too, and that now they had something in common. The heroine added his flowers to her bouquet, after which she thanked the man. Miss Lopez blushed and told the gentleman that it was time for her to go, as she had already taken up too much of his time. But suddenly, the young man, seeing that Ellen was holding her bouquet at the hem of her dress, asked if she wanted to hide the flowers under her skirt now. Enoch chuckled and said that it was not good at all, and the protagonist turned to him and pitifully asked him to stop making fun of her. Elenoia returned home to her room. She had managed to smuggle Astilbe in unnoticed, but there was really no need to try to do it covertly. However, she did not succeed without the Duke's help. When she was already leaving the greenhouse, the man approached her and asked her to give him the flowers. The guards, seeing that it was his lordship who was carrying the plucked branches in his hands, could do nothing since Enoch, as a member of the royal family, had every right to take any plants out of the greenhouse. Ellen clenched her fists in anger, because it turned out that the gentleman had been playing with her all this time, although he himself had helped her carry out the Astilbe without the slightest difficulty. Now Cinderella believes that the Duke reminds her less of a kitten and more of a treacherous snake. However, it was only thanks to him that she managed to obtain the necessary plant, which she can finally use for its intended purpose. The heroine presented the white Astilbe to the box, wondering if it would really work, when suddenly the keyhole clicked. The box opened, and the first thing Lady Lopez saw was a bright magical light. Trying to see at least something through such a bright glow, the girl wondered what was inside. Suddenly, a small piece of paper appeared from the box, on which was a note. The trigger that was not pulled. The lost golden arrow of Cupid. The main character took the paper in her hands and realized that the note was written by her mother, since it was her handwriting. However, she does not understand what these words mean. Ellen began frantically rummaging through the box, thinking that there must be something else there. But there was nothing else in the box, and the worker, sadly falling to her knees, wondered what kind of flash it was, and whether her mother's madness had affected her. The girl sighed because she expected more from this box, so now she will have to solve her problems on her own. Suddenly, as soon as the protagonist looked into the box again, she noticed the word blood written there. Deciding that she just needed to drop some of her blood there, Elenoa picked up the needle that was in her homemade needle case. Miss Lopez looked at the box with alarm, wondering what secrets it held, and that she had a very bad feeling about it. However, she had no other choice, so she sharply pricked her finger and dropped a drop of blood right on the scratched word. At the same moment, long tongues of magical flame appeared, which were so strong that they threw the lady back several steps. The purple haze completely engulfed the frightened heroine, who didn't even have time to shout anything before she plunged into a state similar to sleep. Suddenly, the protagonist's eyes widen as a voice asks her to look here. Ellen looked at her hands, which had suddenly become very small, and on the floor lay the drawing she had made. Then she looked around and realized that she was in the same house where she lived with her mother, and that she had ended up in her childhood. Then a woman with black hair and eyes called out to her. Her mother, who was sitting on the bed next to her. The woman asked her daughter to look at something and showed her a charm that emanated purple flames from her palm. The girl was surprised to see it. The mother told the child that it was called magic, and Ellen was puzzled by the fact that she did not remember this memory from her childhood. Then the mother said that this is what her magic looks like, and every sorcerer is endowed with his own unique magical power from birth. The little girl asked her mother if this meant that she was a sorceress, to which she said that yes, although many see her only as an evil witch. The mother, grabbing her daughter by the hand, told her that she possessed black magic, and that was why she had not dared to use it before. The woman asked Elena to listen carefully and said that she had a love spell in her hands that could bewitch anyone she wanted. But there was a condition. It could only be used once. The mother explained to her daughter that she wanted to pass this power onto her, and that with it, she would make anyone fall at her feet. But then the sorceress, touching the beautiful blue box with her hand, said that for now we will hide their magic here. An excited Ellen asked why she said our, and if that meant she had power too. The woman said with an unnatural smile that, yes, but she had not yet mastered it. After biting her finger and dripping blood into the box, Mom said that this box was a very rare magical item that she had obtained with great difficulty. Then the sorceress extended her hand with a bloody finger to her daughter and said that now it was her turn, to which the little girl shuddered in fear. The mother realized that she had frightened the child with her actions, so she stood up and stroked the girl's head to calm her down. But then from the place that the woman's hand touched, a beautiful white light began to emanate. Mama told Eleanor that her magic was amazing and this thing would help hide it. Only their magic would be kept in this box. But suddenly, the sorceress's speech was interrupted by a terrifying cough, and she herself fell to the floor. The frightened girl rushed to her and asked what was going on. But the mother, stopping the little girl with her hand, calmly said that she had little time left, very little time to take revenge. Finally, the sorceress sternly told her daughter that she had to do it for her, because she was, after all, her child. Immediately after this, reality for the main character shattered into a bunch of small fragments, and she herself flew down. Falling into an endless abyss, adult Ellen does not understand who she should take revenge on, her father or the servants. She has no idea who her mother was talking about. The girl, returning to the present, rose from the floor in fear when a female voice called out to her irritably. She looked at her hands, from which black magic emanated. Lopez had no idea what had just happened to her. But then the stepmother's scream was heard behind the door. Angry that she had not answered for so long, the woman reminded her stepdaughter that they had to be at the banquet today, so she ordered her to get ready quickly. The main character, who had completely forgotten about it, stood up and told Margot that she would be ready soon. The girl began to prepare completely, forgetting about her box, from which magic continued to ooze. Once upon a time, a witch lived on a desert island. She was alone, but she believed that someone would be able to find her in the vast ocean. And finally, one day, an unknown ship docked at the shores of her island. From this ship, along with several warriors, came a handsome man with black hair and gray-blue eyes. For the lonely sorceress, whom no one had ever loved, it was love at first sight. Then she turned all the warriors into pigs and cast a love spell on her lover. But after a while, the spell wore off. Their happiness lasted only a year, and the man's feelings faded. The witch was rejected by him, and from then on, she was left alone again, alone with her sorrow. The protagonist slammed the book shut after reading the story. She found it horrible because it reminded her of her mother. While at a luxurious banquet, the girl hid the book in her pocket and thought that, according to the entries in her diary, her mother had the power to cast a love spell that lasted only a year. Eleonora remembers her mother's words that this charm could bewitch anyone, and thought that, with its help, she could avoid her engagement to Anderson. However, the lady bit her finger and thought that this was a love spell after all, so the love would be false. She did not understand if this was possible. But then a young man approaches. Cinderella touches her hair and says that he has finally found her. Stroking a lock of the young lady's hair, he asked if he could ask her to dance, to which the stunned Ellen wondered who the hell he was. The girl, waving her hands and apologizing to the gentleman, said that she didn't want to because she wasn't feeling well. However, after a few moments, Ellen had to literally run away from this man who could not leave her alone and asked her to stop. The girl continued running, not slowing down. She headed straight for the exit where the carriage was parked. The heroine sped up as fast as she could, wanting to get out of here as quickly as possible and get rid of this annoying gentleman. But as soon as she jumped into the carriage, she met the gaze of none other than Enoch Byrne. Eleanor's face was so close to the Duke's that her cheeks turned red, and she greeted him innocently. Sitting down next to him and thinking about how she ended up in the carriage with him, the heroine said embarrassedly that she had no idea that it was his carriage. Ellen was extremely embarrassed because the young gentleman didn't say anything to her and just stared at her. She mentally begged him to say something. Just then, the same man who had chased Cinderella at the ball ran up to their carriage. He saw her run in here, so he ordered her to get out right away. Suddenly, Enoch began to speak furiously about Maskwell being a real pervert, then asked Ellen if he had tried to touch her with his dirty hands. The protagonist, surprised by the Duke's reaction, said that he had followed her all the way to the ladies' room, and she had tried to escape from him and ended up here. The man, looking at the lady's feet, which surprisingly were bare, said that it seemed that this was how she had lost her shoes. Eleanor became embarrassed and tried to hide her bare feet, muttering something unintelligible. But here the Duke of Byrne, without saying a word, woos the lady's bare foot, which is all covered in bruises and scratches. The worker's cheeks turned red, and she asked the young man in fear what he was doing, to which he only asked her not to move. After this, Enoch took an expensive silk scarf from his jacket and tied it on the beauty's wounded leg. The main character was in no hurry to interrupt the process, but only watched what the man was doing. She was amazed that his lordship had tied and used a scarf. Suddenly, Mr. Byrne told the girl that she had hurt all her legs, then asked if she was a masochist. Eleanor, looking away in embarrassment, said that this was not so at all. But then Enoch asked where her shoes had gone. She suggested that they had fallen off while she was running, to which the Duke replied that he had not known of her habit of losing her shoes. The lady admitted that she was not to blame. As the protagonist wondered why he still wouldn't get up, His Highness suddenly tightened the bandages on her leg, causing Ellen to scream. At last, Mr. Byron, rising to his feet, told Ellen that he hoped she was not going to return to the ball in such a state, and she said no. Enoch, pointing his finger at the beauty, said that, in that case, let her stay here. The carriage with the Duke and Miss Lopez left for an address unknown to the latter. The young man sat down on the seat directly opposite Milady, and silence fell between them. The main character watched in fascination as the relaxed man closed his eyes. But then the girl noticed one detail. His trousers were dirty in the area of his hips. Eleanor remembered that Enoch had just placed her dirty foot on his knee without hesitation. She had always thought that the gentleman had mysophobia, but now she wondered if the rumors were true, because what she saw completely contradicted them. And yet the lady was very worried about this, so she decided to ask the Duke if he was not afraid of getting dirty again. Suddenly, the man coming very close to Ellen asked with a smile why she was interested in this and whether she wanted to know more about him. But His Highness had to step back from Cinderella as he realized that their carriage had arrived at the right address. The young gentleman got out of the carriage and asked the lady to watch her step. She, following him, said that she already knew. Eleanor just wanted to thank the man for taking her home, but suddenly he picked her up in his arms, which completely stunned the beauty. The blushing Madame asked Enoch what this meant, but he casually asked her if she wanted to go barefoot, and the girl admitted that she didn't really want to. Cinderella, looking at the building to which she was heading with the Duke, told him that it did not look like her home. His lordship walked straight towards this house, but the frightened Lady Lopez asked him to stop, to which he only said that she was talking too much. As soon as visitors arrived at the most elite shoe shop, the owner immediately greeted them. But the seller was very surprised when his buyer turned out to be the most respected knight, who was also carrying an incredibly embarrassed girl in his arms. Enoch asked the shopkeeper to bring healing ointments for the lady and also to pick out a pair of shoes for her. He bowed and said that it would be done. The owner ran to carry out the order, and the Duke sat the dissatisfied Elena down on a chair, who affirmatively said that she would buy only one pair of shoes. His Highness, folding his arms across his chest, asked if she intended to pay for them with her own funds. The girl, perplexed, said yes, and asked whose money she should pay with. Enoch stared at the heroine in surprise, thinking that when a gentleman takes a lady to a shoe store, most ladies expect him to cover all the costs. But Ellen had no hopes, as the owner of the boutique showed up with several boxes in his hands, which he could barely carry. There were shoes in there as requested. Eleanor's mouth dropped open in shock when the pile of boxes was laid out on the table in front of her, because she couldn't buy them all. Having chosen a modest pair of sandals for herself, she firmly told the gentleman that even if he preferred to pay for them, she would still choose only one. But suddenly, the Duke grabbed the shoebox that the girl had chosen and threw it behind his back, which completely shocked the main character. Kneeling down in front of Madame Enoch, asked with a smile if she had never been given beautiful shoes before. The man, having put a beautiful white shoe decorated with precious stones on Cinderella, asked her to convey his following words to her sisters. The Duke promised that if they dared to covet his gift, he would personally cut their legs apart. Holding the lady's leg, the knight touched her velvety skin with his fingertips. Then he grinned and told Cinderella that it suited her very well. But she, embarrassedly turning away, thanked him, thinking that he really didn't have mysophobia. Having made his purchases, His Highness brought Miss Lopez home, where she, bowing to him, thanked him once again for everything. The protagonist looked at several boxes of shoes that Enoch had bought her and thought that this was the first time someone had ever bought her so many things. The girl told the gentleman that she would definitely return the money he spent, but he put his hands on his belt in displeasure. The young man asked if she had heard what he had told her, but Cinderella repeated that she could not accept these things just like that. Mr. Byron wanted to explain to the lady, but suddenly his gaze noticed a certain figure at the window in the house, which had been watching them all this time. Helen, frightened by the fact that the man noticed her, immediately hid behind the curtain. Enoch smirked when he noticed his sister peeping through the window, but told Ellen he didn't want her to refuse. The Duke grabbed the lady by the waist and pulled her towards him, stroking Miss Lopez on the top of her head, and said that these were his gifts for her. At that moment, Eleanor pushed the man away from her, saying that it was time for her to go and wishing him a good journey home. Immediately after this, the protagonist rushed into the house, leaving the gentleman to his own devices. Enoch sighed and thought about how strange it was. He should have been disgusted to touch her dirty feet, but he didn't feel disgusted. He assumed that Ellen had most likely bewitched him, which he really liked, because it made him even more interested. Later, Eleanor, having changed into a nightgown, was heading to her room, but came across a half-open door from which the voices of the maids could be heard. The workers gossiped that they considered the heroine a real witch because she managed to charm the Duke, although Helen was not inferior to her in beauty. One of the maids irritably declared that she hated her even more now because she had not been working in the house for as long as they had, although she was from a wealthy family. Listening to this, the protagonist sighed tiredly, thinking that the servants were up to their old tricks again. Ellen had to contain her anger even more when she heard from the maid that she didn't care what family she was from. Lopez was still annoying. The girl found it extremely difficult to contain her rage when another maid said that she had probably stood there and begged Enoch for so many gifts. Cinderella burst into the gossip's room, and they jumped up in fear and began to think about whether she had heard them and what they should do now. Eleanor turned around and told the girls that she knew that she stood out among them and was already used to it. But that did not mean that they could be so impudent. The lady then looked at one of the servants and asked what her father and stepmother would say when they found out that she was stealing food right under their noses. Gonichnaya, who had been stuffing her cheeks with a sandwich stolen from the kitchen the whole time, dropped it from her hands in shock without taking her eyes off the heroine. Secluded in her room, the protagonist thought about how she should have done this from the very beginning, because it was as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She smirked smugly as she remembered how persistently the servants had asked her for forgiveness after her words. Then Miss Lopez remembered that the week was coming to an end. There were only 2 days left until her period to find a worthy husband would end, so she decided to make a decision quickly. The girl remembered that in all the times she had been to social events, 5 gentlemen had shown interest in her. Although it was more than she expected, their wealth was nowhere near the wealth of the Marcus Anderson, which would not suit her father, so she would rule out those options. But Ellen wondered who could be richer than Anderson, and then she realized it was none other than Enoch Byrne. Cinderella covered her face with her hands, thinking that she was going crazy because his lordship would never agree to marry her. The lady knows that he asked her to become her concubine, and in other words, he is not interested in marriage. The worker wondered if he would help her, but then Eleanor remembered that she could bewitch him with her black magic. Deciding that magic would help her find the answer, the main character rose from her chair, clenched her fist, and stood in the middle of the room. The girl put her hands out and concentrated all her strength on using magic, which she did quite well. Finally, Ellen managed to use her magical powers, and she created something very luminous in front of her and looked at it. It turns out that she managed to create a portal, but the protagonist does not know where it leads. The girl wanted to stick her hand in there, but she was immediately sucked into the gate as if into a black hole. The heroine, screaming at the top of her lungs, fell into an unknown dimension where there is nothing but darkness. Soon, Eleanor opened her eyes and screamed in fear. The lady saw that she was wearing a beautiful, expensive dress. She looked around and realized that she was not at home because she did not recognize this place at all. But suddenly, the lady heard a man's voice behind her, which called out to her in a frightening manner. Cinderella shuddered because it seemed familiar to her. Turning around, she saw Marcus Anderson, who, licking his lips like a dog and armed with a whip in his hands, told the girl that she needed to answer. The protagonist, trembling all over and staring at the man in fear, wondered what he was doing here. He hit the girl with a whip with all his might and called her a useless fool. Continuing to beat his wife, Anderson asked her why the devil she had made eyes at the coachman the day before. The lady said she did not know what he was talking about, but the old man ordered her not to try to deny it. The main character fell to the floor, not understanding what was happening at all. She, trying to escape from the tyrant, crawled along the floor, when suddenly she realized that she was seeing her future. Marcus Anderson, grabbing the unfortunate woman by the hair, declared that he would have to teach her good manners, calling her a little fool, The man repeated that she dare not look at others, and Ellen asked him to stop wondering if such a future was really destined for her. But suddenly, this reality shattered into thousands of pieces, and the protagonist again fell into the abyss. The girl opens her eyes and finds herself in a new place. She is lying on the ground in the middle of the forest at night. Suddenly, among the bushes, she notices the shadows of several men, who upon seeing her declared that they had finally found her, which frightened the heroine very much. When the group began to order Elena to be taken alive, but with permission to use weapons, the unfortunate woman realized that these were Anderson's mercenaries. Without thinking twice, the protagonist got up and ran wherever her eyes looked, just to get away from danger. But suddenly, an arrow pierces her leg, leaving a deep wound that makes Cinderella no longer able to run away. The victim was surrounded by the Marquis's mercenaries, who would never give her the opportunity to resist. But then Anderson appears with them, runs up to his wounded wife, grabs her by the throat, and calls her an ungrateful bitch. The man promised to make her limp for the rest of her life, so she couldn't escape again. After that, the world shattered into pieces again. This time, the time traveler finds herself in some room lying on a bed. Ellen tried to move at least one finger, but she couldn't. And then the girl realized that she was most likely dying. The maid, placing a cold bandage on the heroine's forehead, took pity on her, saying that the Marquis would burn in hell for what he did to her and would pay for his sins. The only thing the exhausted protagonist could do was whisper words of gratitude to the servant Lila, with her dry lips. The wanderer once again found herself in the abyss, standing in front of a portal leading to another future. Eleanor burst into tears, because she couldn't believe that such a terrible fate was destined for her. But suddenly, a beautiful blue butterfly flew to her. Immediately after this, she was transported to another future, to the majestic palace of the Duke of Bayern himself. Suddenly, a man placed his hand on Miss Lopez's shoulder and called out to her tenderly. Turning around, the protagonist saw that Mr. Enoch was standing right behind her. The young man asked the lady if she had decided to go for a walk, but she was too shocked to answer. The Duke, covering the lady's head from the sun's rays, said that it was very hot now, and that she should not walk for so long. But then Enoch, grabbing the girl by the hand, led her in an unknown direction, and Ellen could not contradict him. The man brought the lady into the gazebo, where he stood opposite her and pressed her against a post. Suddenly, the protagonist felt His Highness kiss her tenderly. But then the lady saw two maids nearby, who blushed as they looked at them. The heroine also became embarrassed, thinking how they could do this incomparable thing in front of other people. Ellen gently pushed Enoch away from her, telling His Highness that they had better stop. The young man looked into her eyes and asked with a smile why she had just called him His Highness. She, thinking that she had said something wrong with cheeks as red as a turnip, simply called the gentleman Enoch. Eleanor looked away, and the Duke kissed the girl on the forehead and called her a good girl. Then Enoch, with a sly smile, asked the lady whether she had to cheer him up in broad daylight, but she looked at him blankly. But suddenly, the heroine realized that it was not the Duke's mood that had improved, but something lower. The man took the beauty in his arms and led her even further, but she asked him not to hurry so much, wondering what he wanted to do since it was only midday. But unexpectedly, the protagonist finds herself in a new place, which makes her very surprised. The girl realized that she was lying in bed, but she did not understand what had just happened. Suddenly, Eleanor felt that something was wrong with her, after which a cough burst out of her. The girl heard a conversation between two men behind the door, Enoch and the doctor. The latter tells the gentleman that she has a maximum of 3 days left, or even less. The Duke, hearing this, became incredibly angry, and clenching his jaw, cursed viciously. The stunned protagonist realized that she would die in this version of the future as well. The girl wanted to know the time, and looked at the calendar hanging on the wall, and realized that everything would happen only next year. The protagonist comes to the shocking realization that she only has a year and a half left. Finally, Cinderella returns to reality, where she lies exhausted on the floor in the middle of her room. The girl stood up, thinking that she had never thought that she could foresee the future. But suddenly, the main character was overcome by an incredibly strong cough that made her sick. Ellen looked at her palm and realized with horror that she was coughing up blood. Before the unfortunate woman had time to think about anything, the cough overcame her again much stronger. The protagonist realized that using witchcraft shortens her life, and that is why she saw herself dying. It's all about magic. Pouring herself a glass of water, the lady considered that she had lost most of her life. But strangely enough, it did not bother her, although at first she was very scared. Such is the price for the opportunity to see the future. Cinderella realized that these were the consequences of using the black magic that was in her. The beauty also realizes that perhaps this is why her mother did not inform the magic tower, because her magic was also forbidden. As a result, Eleanor has two options. The first is to marry Marquis Anderson, who will treat her very cruelly, or she will spend the rest of the year happily with Mr. Enoch. Looking at the beautiful shoes that the Duke had given her, the girl realized that if she had to choose between them, she would definitely choose the second option. Ellen decided that she had to do whatever it took to make this happen, even if it cost her her life. She would choose her own death. The next day, the main character, having arrived at the Bayern Palace, followed the butler who met her and promised to take her to the master. Cinderella came here to offer Enoch a deal that would be beneficial to both of them, since she cannot immediately ask him to marry her. Last night, she used magic to look into the future. She wasn't sure if she could see another person's future, but she had no problem doing so. Then she managed to find out what she needed, but she had to pay for it with her health. But then the protagonist was distracted from her thoughts by her escort, who called out to her. She asked what was the matter, and the man explained that His Highness had a guest now, so she should wait for him in the living room. Ellen was taken to an empty room where she would spend her time waiting. Taking a small piece of paper with text out of her pocket, the girl decided to repeat for now what she was going to tell the gentleman. Trying to overcome her shyness, she rehearsed her question. Would he like to marry her? She possesses unique magic that would be useful to him. But then Enoch, going about his usual business, suddenly felt his ear itching. His friend looked at him in bewilderment, and the Duke scratched his ear, because judging by the sign, it itches when someone talks about him. Warren asked his friend if he really intended to marry Lady Filone, to which the friend replied that it was none of his business, and advised him to go to the theater with his lady instead. The friend told Enoch that he was only trying to keep an eye on him, to which the Duke mockingly said that he would do better to keep an eye on himself. Nobert folded his arms in displeasure and declared that Lady Filone was nice in public, but he still had a bad feeling about this. Byron told his friend that he knew it, that for him, no woman could compare to his beloved Mercedes. An angry Warren asked what she had to do with it. The Marquis grabbed his head and summed up. He couldn't explain it specifically, but something was definitely wrong with Philoane, and advised his friend to be more careful. Suddenly, Enoch notices an open letter lying on the armrest of the sofa not far from him. The Duke looked closely at the line where the sender's name was written, and saw that it read Loveline Friedrich, who signed herself, Your loving sister. The man, rising from his chair, repeated to his friend that he was not planning to get married, to which the latter irritably asked when he would grow up. Byron asked him with a smile why he was still there since he was going to rest. Warren said that he would rest like that for the rest of his life. The Marquis then asked him if he wanted to play cards with men, to which he angrily replied that he had no intention of playing with some blockheads. Then Nobert told his friend the news that Baron Lopez's son seemed to be in trouble. Enoch shuddered when he heard this. The man revealed that he owed huge sums of money, including money borrowed from Viscount Zelen. When Warren mentioned that the Viscount was rumored to be financed by the Marquis Anderson, Enoch remembered the way he had looked lustfully at Ellen at the ball. His Highness's cheekbones tensed, and he gritted his teeth and called these men scoundrels. Seeing his friend's reaction, Nobert thought that he seemed to be unaware that he had feelings for Lady Lopez, which was why he was so upset. But then the guy decided that he didn't care about it, because his beautiful lover Mercedes was waiting for him. Meanwhile, the main character following the escort thinks about who came to His Highness. She is sure that it was Lady Arkwood. But then the butler approached Ellen and said that they had arrived at the place, and that Enoch had asked to take her to his chambers, which seemed strange to the girl. The attendant took the guest down to the master's room, informed the Duke, and introduced her. The protagonist stood in the middle of the room, and the man asked her why she was standing there, after which he asked her to go to the table. Eleanor noticed a lot of cakes on the table, but she thought that Enoch would definitely not have prepared them for hers. His lordship asked the confused Lady Lopez what had brought her to him, and whether she had come simply to keep him company. The girl was embarrassed to answer him, but the gentleman suddenly handed her a chocolate macaroon and asked her to try it. Cinderella asked what it meant. However, the sorceress, without arguing with the young man, bit off a piece from his hand. Enoch then asked his guest with a grin if she had changed her mind about his proposal. The blushing main character first asked what he was talking about, but then replied that of course not. Eleanor rubbed her hands together nervously, but mentally asked herself to calm down, because what she was about to do now she had already rehearsed many times. Coming close to the man's face, she came to ask him if he wanted to marry her. But Enoch, raising his eyebrows in bewilderment, asked the lady what she had just said. The protagonist smiled excitedly because she knew that he would react like that. But then the sorceress thought that she could actually cast a love spell on him, and that would make everything much easier. However, the girl immediately recoiled from the gentleman, deciding that this was not right, because it was a crime, and she did not have the courage for such a thing. Therefore, she would make an honest deal with His Highness. The heroine warned the man that she was serious, and that if he was not engaged to Lady Philone, she would offer him to marry her. Cinderella noticed that after the banquet, his relationship with Philoane had become strained. Iris stopped visiting the Lopez house, and finding a husband for Helen became impossible. This was the price her stepmother paid for her carelessness, and because of it, her daughter could not stop crying over these events. Margot hated her stepdaughter even more, but the latter already knew this. Eleanor realizes that if she marries the Duke, the Philoane family will become her enemy. They were counting on Iris marrying Enoch, but she ruined everything. However, the protagonist decided that this was now unimportant compared to the suffering that marriage with Marquis Anderson would bring her. The girl clenched her hand into a fist. She urgently needed to make a deal with his lordship because how she would live the rest of her life depended on it. Enoch, having drunk his tea, calmly told his guest that he was not going to marry anyone, neither her nor Lady Philoane, nor anyone else. Ellen thought about how she had expected him to answer that way, so it would make it easier for her to think about what she would say next. The sorceress told the gentleman that she was asking him not for an ordinary marriage, but for a fictitious one. The lady leaned towards the man's face and said that she asked him to love her for just a year. Enoch snapped his finger at Ellen, asked her what she was talking about, and said he had been talking nonsense since he came here. The girl asked him to forgive herself, but said that she was saying this in all seriousness, and she would explain everything in detail if he listened to hers. The lady then decided to show the man that she possessed black magic, causing the space around her to fill with a purple haze. But suddenly, Enoch grabbed the lady in his arms, threw her down on the table, and hung on top of her. He angrily asked her what she was doing. Not daring to move under the master, the embarrassed girl said that she possessed magic and that she could make anyone fall in love with her. Byron asked if she had reported this to the magic tower, and she replied that she had not yet, since she herself had only recently learned of her powers. The man said that it took her a long time to understand, to which the beauty agreed. The young man tensely confessed to the girl that he had never heard of love spells. Ellen, rising, told him that she hadn't heard either, but she wanted to use it on him. The lady explained that it would only last for a year, and then they would simply part ways as if nothing had happened. The Duke sighed, and placing his hands on his hips, asked what he would get in return for this deal. The heroine said that she could tell him about the future, and as he had already understood, she was able to foresee it. His Highness stated that this was impossible because no sorcerer could have two types of magic at once. This is known to absolutely everyone. The protagonist looked down and said that it was not so impossible. Enoch already thought that the girl had stolen this magic, but she said that she knew that one should not steal someone else's magic, and her mother had passed it on to her. Witchcraft goes against the rules of this world, and most people are destined to master only one type of magic. Even Lady Arkwood, who is considered a saint, only has the power to heal, and to have two, like Ellen, one must either be stolen or inherited. Mr. Byron asked Cinderella if she understood that what she was saying was forbidden, to which she replied that she did, and that she was risking her life. The gentleman humbled the sorceress with a menacing look and reminded her that he could take her to the magic tower right now. She sadly said that she knew it and that she could not stop him. Enoch ordered her not to pretend to be brave because he knew that she was scared. Suddenly, the main character dared to look at the Duke with a gaze full of sincerity and hope. He looked into her blue eyes, raised an eyebrow in bewilderment, and blushed. Enoch is right. Ellen is scared to death. Their empire is at war with Atreus, a country that worships the devil. Enoch led the empire to victory, but everyone knows what horrors the enemy sorcerers have committed. The main character was dejected, thinking that if people found out that she possessed two types of magic, then irreversible consequences awaited her. The young man sighed, and stroking the girl on the head, asked her to continue and said that he was listening to her. The lady told him that he gave the impression that he didn't care about those around him, but she knew that he kept a close eye on Atreus and the economy. The war is over, but complete security has not yet arrived. Enoch is in a difficult position on the chessboard. He lives for the king and the prosperity of the empire. The heroine explained that with her ability to foresee the future, she would look after Atreus on his behalf and also provide him with information. The girl wanted to demonstrate her magic to the man, but he suddenly grabbed her hand. Enoch, hugging the beauty to himself, said that it was still a good offer. Embarrassedly stepping back from the young gentleman, the main character again asked him to take her words seriously. Cinderella said that if he reported her to the magic tower, she would spend the rest of her life behind bars because she possessed two types of black magic. The Duke chuckled and said that she was quite eloquent for someone who was scared to death, and the protagonist said that it was so because her life was at stake. His Highness gently stroked the sorceress's head and said that he liked her approach. The man asked if it meant that she had recently awakened her own magic and inherited the other from her mother, to which she agreed. The gentleman grasped Milady's chin with his fingers and asked her if she knew what would happen to her if her words turned out to be a lie. Ellen said she was telling the truth, and Byron joked that she really didn't look like someone who wanted to go to prison. The lady thought he was making fun of her. The protagonist reflected that admittedly, she had expected a worse reaction. The Duke asked his guest why she was offering a deal for only a year, when if he wanted, he could let her stay forever. She shyly admitted that she could only cast spells for a year, and that her powers of foresight were limited. The girl said that they would eventually run dry, like water spilling from cracks. But Eleanor did not tell Enoch that magic was taking years of her life. The man thoughtfully asked why he should believe her, to which the heroine angrily asked to give her a chance, since she had done so much to convince him. Enoch asked the girl how she was going to prove that she had the magic of foresight, and the protagonist began to come up with a way to prove it. Noticing the piles of papers on the gentleman's desk, she asked him if he had invested in lottery, and that his investments had recently increased. His Highness grinned and told Lady Lopez that she was quite well informed. The girl said that as far as his investments are concerned, she would advise him to return the funds within 3 days. Eleanor explained that in 5 days, a deadly poison would be found in the company's perfume. Lottery has a long history. The ownership of the companies has been passed down from generation to generation. Their goods are in demand among the royal families. Enoch asked if she meant that they would end because of one perfume, to which she said that yes, and they were supplying the deadly scent to the royal family. The girl added that when this becomes known, the whole background of the company will come to light, but the man suddenly asked if she saw this in the future. She said that this was so, and that he could already hand her over to the magic tower, or arrest her, but the Duke, leaning towards her, asked her to calm down. The young man, bringing his lips close to the beauty's ear, said that it turned out that she knew about the risk when she came here. Holding the girl's hand out to his face, the gentleman asked her to show him how she could look into the future. The main character immediately formed a glowing portal with the help of her magic. The man said he now understood how she did it, and Ellen said she couldn't see the future now because she had to really want to know about something. Mr. Byron asked her to do it, but the girl said disappointedly that she couldn't now. The Duke asked if she was joking, asking how he could then believe her too, which the lady replied that it was beyond her power and that there was a limit to witchcraft. As soon as the main character snapped her finger, the portal shattered into pieces like glass and then disappeared. She turned to Enoch and repeated that he had only 5 days to verify the truth of her words. The man said that he just needed to check the lottery, but suddenly the protagonist showed him a piece of paper. Cinderella said that this would be a sensation in the newspaper Istina on May 2nd. The lady said with a smile that they would write an article exposing the unpleasant truth about this company. The girl asked the gentleman to remember her words, but Enoch remained silent, and the embarrassed protagonist hid the piece of paper in her pocket and wondered why he was so quiet. Then Eleanor handed the Duke some documents, and when he asked what they were, she said that it was a marriage contract in which everything was written. The young man said that it looked good, except for one detail, and the main character looked at him in bewilderment. The man coquettishly asked the guest why she was asking for love for only a year and whether she was going to use a love spell on him. The lady modestly said that it was possible to, which Enoch asked if she wanted all this knowing that the feelings would be insincere. The girl admitted that she doesn't care whether he truly loves her or not. The Duke, coming close to the lady, asked if she simply wanted to play with him, to which the sorceress replied that she would never do such a thing. The heroine will not be bothered if his love turns out to be false, but she will live the rest of her life not in oppression, but she understands that it is impossible not to want something more. Eleanor turned around and told the gentleman that if he had no more questions, she would go. But suddenly, Milady froze when Enoch began to say that she reminded him of a fawn trying to escape from a hunter pursuing it. The protagonist added thoughtfully that she knew the hunter could shoot her at any moment. Cinderella had already reached for the door handle, but her hand froze when a man's voice called out to her affectionately. The Duke, smiling warmly, told the lady that they would see each other again in 5 days. The sorceress just stared at him with an innocent look and flushed cheeks. The main character, sitting down in the carriage, remembers His Highness's words that they would see each other in 5 days. The lady grabbed her head because she realized that he was too smart, but the girl wondered why he was behaving like this. Even if Enoch accepted her proposal, they would only be together for a year. Their love would be like a sandcastle that would collapse at any moment. Lopez looked out the window and asked herself not to be so soft-hearted, because she was sure that the gentleman was not at all serious with her. The carriage left for home, while the girl's thoughts were occupied with the man's words, that she knew that love would not be true, but she still wanted it. 5 days later, a newspaper comes out that says everything Ellen predicted. Toxins have been found in lottery perfumes, and the Royal Guard has launched an investigation into the company. Mr. Byron read this news drinking expensive wine in a white robe. He understands that Eleanor was right down to the smallest detail. Having thrown the newspaper into the fireplace, the man turned his attention to his servant, who offered the Duke more wine, but he refused and said that he could go. As soon as Enoch found himself alone in the room, he threw off his robe, revealing his broad back covered in scars. The young man plunged into a pool of hot water, but then felt a strange tingling sensation in his body. He realized that these were phantom pains again. His lordship was wounded several years ago during the war against Atreus. His opponent was one of the enemy's strongest warriors. Byron went into battle not only because it was his duty as Freden's commander-in-chief, but also because he was tired of his boring life. During the war, he got the necessary adrenaline rush, and also fought to the last Atreus. And after the war, his life again took on an ordinary look. The man didn't even imagine that an ordinary girl could add a little fun to it. At first, Ellen seemed unremarkable to Enoch, but before he knew it, he began to admire her. Because of her bold look and voice, the gentleman thinks that she is quite an interesting character. After taking a bath and leaving the bathroom, the Duke suddenly noticed a letter on the table. Seeing that it was a letter from his brother, Henry Friedrich, the man made a displeased face. His Highness crumpled the letter and threw it on the floor, because even without opening the envelope, he knew that the king wanted him to get married as soon as possible. Then the gentleman remembered Ellen's words, that she was only asking him to love her for a year. As he exhaled smoke from his cigar, the young man thought that for some people, a year is not long at all, but for others, it is a long period of time. Mr. Byron sighed and thought that it was a good suggestion. He knew that it would be more correct to report Ellen to the magic tower, but he thought that such talent should not be wasted. Enoch doesn't care about love at all, and she herself doesn't expect anything from him. But by making a deal, they will both benefit without sacrificing anything. The man puffed on his cigar and wondered why Lopez was only asking for a year, but then decided he didn't care that their marriage would be a sham. The gentleman grinned slyly, deciding that he did not intend to let this girl go. Meanwhile, at the Lopez estate, Margot was calmly sipping tea when a maid came up to her and said that a letter had arrived at her address. The woman asked who it was from, but when she saw that the sender was none other than Enoch Byron, she was so shocked that she dropped the cup on the floor, causing it to break. The stepmother, with trembling hands, took out the letter, which stated that today, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he was going to visit Ellen Lopez. Margot began to frantically think about what all this meant and why on earth the gentleman wanted to see her stepdaughter. She paced the room and decided that it was not at all what she thought. But still, if the Duke is really going to propose to Ellen, then the stepmother cannot allow it. According to her plan, her stepdaughter should marry the Marquis Anderson, and then he will pay off Anthony's debts, and if this does not happen, then her child will be in danger. The woman, gathering all her strength and rage, decided that this had to be put to an end. The main character was peacefully reading a book in her room, but suddenly her stepmother bursts in with a very displeased face. The worried girl asked her what was the matter, but she did not answer, and 2 more servants entered the room. Without explaining anything, Margot pointed her finger at her stepdaughter and ordered her to be seized, and 2 maids, bowing their heads, said that they would immediately carry out the order. The maids grabbed the protagonist, who was still asking in fear what was going on. Ignoring Ellen's pleas to let her go, the servants dragged her down the corridor. Having thrown Cinderella into a dark, dirty old room, the stepmother asked her subordinate to tell Anderson that she wanted to see him as soon as possible. The heroine tried to knock on the door and turn the handle, but it turned out to be locked. The girl was shocked when she realized that she was locked in this cold, dark room. Having calmed down a little, the lady walked around the room and thought about why she was locked here, that her stepmother had a mind of her own. Sitting on the floor, the protagonist thought about how only Enoch could save her, and whether the news about the lottery had reached him yet. The girl is sure that he already knows, and that he will come to her if he is interested in a fictitious marriage, and if he wants to benefit from her magic. But then the thought came to Elena about whether she should look into the future. She decided to do so, but she would only look at what awaited her today. Suddenly, the lady was pulled out of her thoughts by the sharp scraping of the handle on the other side of the door. Margot entered the room with a tray of bread and water in her hands. She was surprised with a nasty smile that her stepdaughter had not shed a tear. The woman threw the tray of food on the floor right at the feet of the unfortunate girl. The main character seriously asked her stepmother why she locked her here and whether it was in order to hand her over to Marcus Anderson. Cinderella asked if her father knew about this, to which the Baroness, smiling, said that he had given his consent. The protagonist told her stepmother that she needed to tell him something, so he asked her to let her go immediately, but she said that it was better for her to sit here. Lady Lopez then said that she would greatly regret this, to which Margot menacingly asked her who she thought she was. Ellen told the woman that she was engaged to the Duke of Bayern, and she could not give her to the Marquis Anderson, when suddenly the Baroness, with her eyes wide open and pointing her finger at her, ordered her to be quiet and said that no one would believe that she was engaged to Enoch. She leaned down in front of her stepdaughter and hissed that she would never have a happy ending, and it was time for her to learn that. The mother grabbed Elena by the jaw and shouted that she wanted noble sluts like her to end up as street courtesans. The woman furiously confesses to Cinderella that when she first saw her, she was overcome with trepidation. She acted as if she were above all of them, but then the heroine said that it meant she despised high society and hated the fact that she was born a commoner. She ordered her to shut up, but the sorceress continued to speak. That is why she takes out all her resentment on her, because she comes from a noble family. The stepmother, having humbled the girl with a look of animal hatred, said that she had actually ordered her to shut her mouth. But Eleanor said that she blamed the wrong person and that she was unhappy, not because she was born into an ordinary family. Suddenly, Margot slapped her stepdaughter in the face, not even letting her finish. The unfortunate heroine fell to the floor, and the woman, kicking her with her heel, said that perhaps she was right in blaming her for this. She grabbed the girl by the hair and pulled her towards herself, asking if she liked what they were doing to her. Ellen was unable to rise, and her stepmother towered over her, calling her an ungrateful girl and declaring that she did not deserve happiness. The Baroness added that her engagement to the Duke of Bayern was only her stupid fantasy, and she was destined to sit here until the Marquis Anderson came for her. The woman left, leaving her stepdaughter to herself. She raised her head, looked at the glass of water lying on the tray, and came up with an idea. The girl threw the glass on the floor, causing it to break into sharp pieces. Taking one of them in her hands, the main character realized that she did not have to use magic. Arriving at the Lopez Anderson estate, he asked the maid if Eleanor was waiting for him there, to which she replied that this was exactly the case. The Marquise became hot with anticipation of pleasure, and licking his lips, said that Lady Lopez finally belonged to him. As soon as the door to the dark room opened and the protagonist saw the man she hated in the doorway, she screamed in fear. The old man told the girl that he knew they would meet again, but she, trembling with fear, ordered him not to approach her. He assumed that she didn't fully understand everything yet, so he explained that she now belonged to him and that her parents had sold her for a good price. The heroine began to think about how to get out. She knows that at least 2 servants are on duty outside the door. She needs to somehow get past them and get to the main gate. She clutched the shard of glass she had been hiding behind her back and convinced herself that as soon as she left this room, she would run as fast as she could without looking back. The pervert's hand reached out to Lady Lopez, but she was no longer so scared because she knew what to do. Just at this time, Mr. Enoch arrived at the estate and was already getting out of his carriage. Looking at the house, he had a bad feeling about this. Eleanor defiantly pulled Marquis Anderson's hand away, repeating that he dare not touch her. He, rubbing his palm, which was sore from the blow, asked Milady through clenched teeth who she thought she was. He reached out his hand to the girl again, wondering if she really believed that the Duke would help her, even though he barely even remembered her. The pervert ordered the sorceress to finally wake up, because she would soon become his wife, but asked if it was worth showing her now what awaited her in the future. But then Eleanor, deciding that the right moment had come, boldly waved a shard of glass right in front of the man's face. Anderson screamed in horror as the main character managed to wound him in the shoulder. The Marquis rushed towards Lady Lopez with all his fury, and calling her a petty piece of trash, asked how she dared to do this. However, the protagonist dealt him a second blow even more painful, between the legs, from which he immediately froze. The old man fell suffering from pain, and Eleanor stood next to him, dumbfounded, wondering what to do next. Suddenly, the noise from the room was heard by the Marquis's guards, who had arrived with him. The guys burst into the room, asking what was going on. Seeing their boss in such a state, the guards rushed to his aid, and the main character slipped out of the room in the confusion. The sorceress ran with all her might. She realized that she had to escape before they caught up with her. She ran to the stairs that led to the hall. There she saw the main door, and realized that this was her only way out. But suddenly, on her way, Ellen meets Melissa, who modestly calls out to her and asks where she is going looking like that. She didn't answer her, but only sternly asked her not to stand in her way. But her stepsister, approaching her, said that she seemed to be trying to escape from something. Cinderella asked her to stop, because she did not have time. Suddenly, the Marquis and his guards followed the protagonist, and pointing a finger at her, ordered her to be seized immediately. Without wasting a second, Lopez ran around her sister and down the stairs. But suddenly, she grabbed her by the hair, so that she almost fell off her feet. The frightened heroine asked her what it meant, to which Melissa, calling Elena, her sweet little sister, asked why she was running away. Dragging her back, the hypocrite said that real ladies do not act like that, and she should not treat her fiancé like that. The heroine asked her to let her go, wondering where she got so much strength from. Finally, Melissa threw the protagonist right at Marcus Anderson's feet. The old man clapped his hands and happily told the girl that she had done a great job, which made her smile. Then the man, lustfully gasping for air, told the future bride that she had behaved very impudently, for which she should receive her punishment. Grabbing the unfortunate woman by the throat and lifting her up, he asked how she dared to think about running away, and even attacking him. Suddenly, Ellen noticed out of the corner of her eye that Helen was peeking out of the doorway on the first floor, spying on them. Suddenly, for some reason, she became alarmed and flew away without saying a word. Marcus Anderson, as he came down the stairs, dragged Ellen along with him, telling her that she should say thank you for not calling the police. Then an excited Margot runs up to him, saying that she heard that he was wounded, justifying herself by saying that Ellen is as crazy as her late mother. He said that everything was fine, because she would soon become his wife after all, and therefore a serious conversation awaited her at home. Suddenly, the main character, who had not had the strength to get back on her feet all this time, called Anderson an old pervert and ordered him to shut up. Margot covered her mouth in shock, and the angry Marquise asked the girl what she had just said. The sorceress, clenching her jaw, decided that she would not allow him to break her anymore, and she would rather die than live with him. Ellen, standing up straight before Anderson and her stepmother, told the latter that she knew she had wished her a hard fate, and she must admit that the feeling was mutual. Glaring at Margot, the girl continued. She said that she really wanted her daughters to suffer too. The Baroness was completely shocked when the heroine said that there was nothing to say about her son. He was addicted to gambling and would not become an heir. Eleanor shouted that everyone here would pay for everything only 10 times more, and all the people who destroyed someone else's life would stain their own destiny. Margot was about to swing at her stepdaughter, but suddenly a calm male voice was heard nearby, and the woman froze. It turned out to be Enoch, who said that he had been waiting in the living room all this time, but now he asked the Baroness to explain what was going on. 15 minutes before these events, Helen, wandering around the estate, thinks that she is already tired of sitting within 4 walls because no one visits her. Iris no longer invites her to visit her, although they were very close. Now they do not communicate and avoid each other because of her mother's stupid mistake. Suddenly, the girl meets the Duke of Bayern himself on her way. Although the lady was frightened by his appearance, she did not forget to say hello. She asked the man what brought him there, and whether he had come for Eleanor, to which he said that it was so, and asked her to tell her that he was here. Helen suddenly thought that apparently the rumors were true. His lordship and Cinderella really were dating. But then the girl remembered that Iris and Enoch were supposed to be engaged, which meant she had a great opportunity to take revenge. If the rumors about the Duke and Eleanor did not die down, Iris would not be able to bear it. The lady smiled like a fox and decided that she would definitely take revenge on her traitor. She happily told the young master that he need not worry and that she would bring her right away. As Helen walks towards her stepsister's room, she thinks that perhaps she should treat Eleanor better now. After all, she could become the Duchess of Bayern, and she would treat her well if they became close. Margot's daughter realized that she was not as stupid as she thought. As soon as she burst into her sister's room and announced that a guest was waiting for her, she suddenly discovered that she was not there. Helen walked back, wondering why she seemed to have disappeared now, if she had been hiding in her room all this time. But then the girl heard a strange noise coming from another part of the house. Running there, Margot's daughter suddenly saw her own sister holding Ellen by the hair and dragging her up the stairs. Helen's mouth dropped open in shock, wondering if Melissa had gone crazy. When the old man grabbed the unfortunate woman by the throat, she suddenly realized that this man was Marquis Anderson. Having met Eleanor's gaze, the girl immediately turned around and ran towards Mr. Bayern. Helen burst into the room where he was waiting and called out to him anxiously. He calmly asked what was the matter. Out of anxiety, Madame tried to explain to the man that Ellen was now at the front staircase, and not alone, but with Marquis Anderson. But suddenly, Enoch, looking down at her menacingly, asked her to repeat everything she had said again, and more slowly. Time returns to the present, and the stepmother told the master that she could explain everything, but he ignored her and walked on. His Highness embraced the exhausted protagonist and pressed her to his chest. Then he placed his hand on her cheek, looking at her with regret and compassion. Margot asked, His Highness puzzled if they could talk somewhere else, but he, turning an angry look at her, asked what they were going to talk about, since it was already obvious what they were trying to do. The Baroness stuttered and asked what he was talking about, because she was sure that there had been a misunderstanding. Enoch asked her not to try to deny it, because he had heard everything from her daughter Helena. But then Eleanor asked him what he was trying to do. Suddenly, Margot and Marquis Anderson flinched when the man suggested that maybe he should get rid of them. His Highness stepped forward, asking Lady Lopez to wait there. Enoch told the old man that there were things he could not stand. He despised scum who thought they were more than they really were, and those who dared to encroach on what belonged to him. Suddenly, with one deft movement, Mr. Bayern punched the old man in the jaw, causing one of his teeth to fly off and his nose to bleed. After such a blow, Marquis Anderson lost consciousness and fell backwards onto the floor. His lordship, chuckling, told the pervert that he fit both of those criteria. Then the young man looked at Ellen, who was standing nearby and watching everything. The main character thought that no one could even imagine that he was capable of such a thing, when suddenly she lost her balance and fell to the ground. However, the girl was caught in the arms of a worried Mr. Bayern in time. The stepmother, seeing Marquis Anderson lose consciousness, panicked at the realization that Enoch could so easily raise his hand against a person. The woman turned her gaze to the Duke and saw that he had taken Lady Lopez in his arms and was looking at her with a grave gaze. Margot was so scared of him that she lost her footing and fell to the floor trying to crawl away from him, screaming that she had done nothing. Seeing her servants, she stretched out her trembling hand to them and began to beg them for help. But suddenly, the woman became so nervous that she lost consciousness and stopped moving. Enoch turned around indifferently and laughed at the fact that these people dared to call themselves family for Illinois. Then the gentleman, gently calling out to the main character, told her that he accepted her proposal. The man congratulated the lady on the fact that she was now his. Ellen only smiled in response and, sighing with relief, relaxedly pressed herself against the Duke's chest. Very quickly, the main character arrived at the castle of her future husband, where several maids immediately arranged for her to bathe. The protagonist hadn't thought about his lordship taking her to the Winter Palace. She hadn't planned it at all, but maybe it was for the best. But suddenly, the girl thought about what would happen if Marquis Anderson told someone that she had injured him. But then she realized that in fact, she was the victim here, and she shouldn't even think about him. But then the girl was pulled out of her thoughts by a maid, who announced to her that her bathing was over. Cinderella came out of the bathroom and wrapped herself in a towel, but suddenly heard the maids calling her again. The maids asked the mistress to give this work to them, because His Highness asked her to take good care of it. The sorceress asked, embarrassed, if this was true, then thanked him, thinking that she had never been courted like this before. Night fell very quickly, and the main character lay down on the large bed in her new luxurious room, but she was wide awake. She remembered Enoch's words congratulating her on the fact that she now belonged to him. The lady covered her face with her hands and tossed and turned in the bed, wildly embarrassed, and not believing that he had said this in front of her entire family. But still, the lady admitted that she was still very pleased to hear it. Ellen also remembered that when the Duke saw how they were treating her, he was simply furious. She could not even imagine that he could be so harsh. And then the beauty had an interesting thought about what if His Highness suddenly had some feelings for her. However, she immediately pushed these thoughts away, and raising herself up on her elbows, realized that at this rate she would definitely never fall asleep. Putting on her slippers, the protagonist decided to leave her room to at least relieve her boredom a little. But then she saw a butler in the corridor, which upset her greatly because she wanted to inspect the palace herself, but he would immediately undertake to accompany her. Deciding that she had no other choice, the lady took off her slippers so that they would not make noise, and quietly made her way past the butler, who was almost asleep anyway. However, after a few minutes of walking, the main character suddenly realized that she had no idea where she was. The girl grabbed her head, thinking that she was trying to be invisible, but it backfired, and she got lost. Eleanor noticed that she had also dropped her slippers somewhere, which is why she was walking around barefoot. She didn't know what to do now and regretted not staying in the bedroom. Suddenly, Lady Lopez heard the sound of running water coming from the farthest room in the corridor, from which the light also emanated. The protagonist decided to look in there and was very surprised when she saw a huge pool that was so hot that steam was coming out of it. The beauty leaned down to the water, admiring out loud what a beautiful place it was, which looked like a location from a fairy tale. Ellen wanted to touch the water with her fingers, but saw that bubbles began to emerge from the place where she touched the surface of the water. Before the lady had time to understand anything, a huge stream of water splashed in front of her, as if from a fountain. Because of this, the heroine got wet from head to toe, and trying to cough, she screamed, "What the hell was that just now?" But suddenly, the girl heard someone say her name, and looking up, she did not immediately notice the person in front of her. Mr. Byron, standing before his future bride, completely naked, with drops running down his body, calmly asked what she was doing there. Eleanor jumped back as far as she could with a scream and fearfully asked the man to get dressed. But he just stared at her, without saying a word, which only further confused the lady, who did not understand why he was not getting dressed. Covering her reddened face with her hands, the protagonist began to think about who had pulled her out of her room, and why, of all the places in this huge palace, she was lucky enough to end up here. Suddenly, Ellen, as soon as she opened her eyes, saw right in front of her face Enoch, who had sat down next to her. Then the man leaned towards the girl's ear, and she, stopping him with her hands and closing her eyes, asked what he was doing. But he, stepping back from her and putting on his clothes, said that he was simply taking a robe since she herself had asked him to get dressed. Then it dawned on the protagonist that the Duke hadn't done anything wrong. The basket with the robes was just standing next to her. His Highness asked what she was thinking, but Lady Lopez was too embarrassed to give a clear answer. Enoch smirked and asked why she was so shy, then advised her to get used to it because they would soon be a couple. Eleanor said that although this was true, they would not have a real marriage, but one of convenience. The Duke, sitting down next to her, said that she had spoken of wanting love, but asked whether she expected him to love her only in words. The gentleman, calling Lady Lopez his dear future bride, said that she did not have to act as if she had seen something disgusting. Suddenly, Enoch picked up the girl in his arms, but she indignantly asked him to let her go, to which the man said no, because she was without shoes. Madame said that she could manage herself, but the Duke suddenly asked her if he suited her tastes. The heroine asked what it was for. Mr. Burns said it was important to him, because if they were going to spend nights together, he wanted her to be attracted to him. The protagonist immediately blushed, not believing that Enoch had actually just said that. Eleanor turned away from him and admitted that she, so to speak, did not like looking at a naked man. So she asked the gentleman to stop, but he grinned and said that it was cheeky and that you definitely won't get bored with her. His Highness, having retired to a room with the bride, offered her some tea, but she refused, saying that she was fine. The young man grinned and asked if she was really that embarrassed. The main character, angrily clenching her fists, shouted that of course it was so, because all the servants saw how he carried her in his arms. Byron, thoughtfully swallowing his tea, said that servants were needed to make life easier, and as soon as they got married, she would become the mistress of the house. The man asked her why she was so uncomfortable, but then said she was in the bathroom because she was lost when she should have asked for help. She said she felt awkward doing that. Enoch said that in fact all noble people lived like this, and she would also need to get used to it. The girl said that she knew about it, but as far as he knew, before no one cared about her origin. His Highness clenched his jaw and said that it was all the fault of those idiots in the Lopez family. The gentleman thought about stripping them of their title, and the main character calmed down a little in the meantime. Since the topic of marriage had come up, Eleanor decided to ask Enoch if he really planned to marry her, and if so, how he planned to do it. The man said that first they needed to get engaged, but before that, he needed to sort out a couple of things. Ellen asked if he still had the contract she had given him, but he said he had burned it, after which there was an awkward silence. The girl jumped to her feet and furiously asked why he did this, to which he only casually promised that he would fulfill all the conditions, even so. But the sorceress sternly stated that she wanted everything to be recorded on paper and asked the man not to forget that they would only be contracting it for a year. The Duke asked why she was so insistent on the contract, and when she planned to use her spell, she decided to ask his lordship when he wanted it himself. Enoch smiled tenderly and said that the wedding night would be best. The man sat down next to the beauty and asked if she didn't want to enjoy her to the fullest, to which she sheepishly said that it was not at all necessary. The Duke pulled Cinderella's face towards him and whispered that she seemed like a naive lady, but she allowed herself such impudence, then offered to kiss her. The main character asked the gentleman, in fear, what he was talking about, then asked him to stop, but it was too late. The lips of the young man and the sorceress were so close that the latter felt as if her heart was about to jump out of her chest. Yet the lips of His Highness and his future bride merged in a gentle and quiet kiss. But suddenly, the couple's romantic moment was interrupted by a knock coming from the door. The Duke, sighing and wondering who could have come at such an hour, asked who was there, whereupon the butler informed him that Lady Arkwood wished to see him. The protagonist, hearing this, thought that this was the same Lady Penelope with the ability to heal. Penelope, the daughter of the Duke of Arkwood, is highly respected for her ability. She has a kind heart and a beautiful appearance, and is also very witty. Eleanor thinks she's a frequent visitor here. She bumped into her when she was in the palace, and it might seem inappropriate if she and Enoch are close. The girl looked at Enoch, whose jaw muscles were clenched, and thought that perhaps she really was the perfect companion for him. Suddenly, Penelope herself entered the room and greeted His Highness kindly. However, seeing a girl next to him, the lady sheepishly apologized and said that she did not know that he had guests. Arkwood asked the heroine if her name was Ellen. The protagonist, standing up and bowing her head to the lady, said that this was absolutely so, after which she said that she was glad to see her. Her grace was so surprised by the graceful manners of the sorceress that she stared at her with a blush on her cheeks. Penelope approached the heroine and said that they had already met, and that she did not expect Enoch to receive guests at such a late hour. But the Duke joked that it was more unusual for him to break into someone else's house in the middle of the night. The girls looked at him in bewilderment for such words. Then the main character said that she would probably go about them because she didn't want to embarrass them. But Enoch and the lady suddenly asked her where she was going and asked her to sit down immediately. She did not argue with them. Mr. Byron, seated at table with Eleanor, told Penelope that he did not know the reason for her visit, but hoped that it required delay. She sat down on the sofa opposite him, asked him to be patient, and asked if he had thought about her proposal. The man asked what other proposal. The protagonist jumped in surprise when Lady Arkwood said that she was talking about their marriage, and asked him not to pretend that he didn't know anything. The Duke asked why he should care to, which she replied that, as she had already said, they would both benefit. When suddenly, Enoch, declaring that this was no longer necessary, introduced his future bride to Penelope. Her ladyship jumped to her feet and asked the man, dumbfounded, what he was talking about. She pointed her finger at Ellen and asked if he was telling the truth about her, to which the gentleman replied that she was, and asked why he would joke now. But Penelope said irritably that she meant why this particular girl was honored to become his wife, and why it happened this way. The main character became worried because she thought that the lady was furious because Enoch chose her as his wife. But Lady Arkwood suddenly asked Eleanor if Enoch was blackmailing her too, because she couldn't understand how she agreed to marry such a moron. However, the girl calmed down and told the bride that it was rude of her and that she should have congratulated them right away. The sorceress smiled and said that she didn't have to worry about it, and the Duke told her that she could finally admit her boorishness. Penelope asked him what he meant, but he said he didn't see the point in explaining, and suggested she go and do her own thing. She shouted irritably that he didn't have to repeat himself and would leave now. The lady headed for the exit, but turned around and told Eleanor that she should not hesitate to ask her for help if she needed it. She thanked her for her kindness, but said that she thought everything would be fine. Arkwood smiled and admitted that she was very glad to hear this, after which she said goodbye to everyone. Ellen breathed a sigh of relief, and Enoch said that he should put Penelope on the blacklist of guests at his estate. Thus began Lady Lopez's stay in the Winter Palace of Bayern. To her surprise and chagrin, she quickly became accustomed to her new life. She and His Highness are getting closer to the date they have set for their engagement. But rumors began to spread in the capital that Ellen was allegedly being kept locked up in the Winter Palace. This was also discussed at the next banquet. 3 gossips were discussing the rumor that Ellen was first a mistress, but the Duke decided to marry her. Another lady thought it was like a cheap novel, but another lady added that the Marquis Anderson was rumored to have been at Lopez's house on the day the Baron's daughter left for the Winter Palace. The gossip girl said she saw him looking at her in an intimate way the night before. The friend told her not to worry because the Marquise would fail. But suddenly, one of the ladies started talking about the fact that, if you think about it, if His Highness really is going to marry Ellen, then what will happen to Lady Filone? But the gossiping girlfriends suddenly noticed that the object of their gossip had come to the ball, and everyone present also began to look at her askance. One of the ladies said that she was sure that His Highness would take care of this, with which her friend agreed. Then the gossips decided to disperse, since they did not want to accidentally run into Lady Philoane. Iris, hearing the contempt from society, and feeling how everyone was avoiding her, involuntarily clenched her jaw in anger. One day, Ellen decided to visit her fiancé's office and tell him about the strange rumors that were going around, and wanted to know if he was planning to sort it out. The man asked from whom she learned about all this gossip, to which the girl embarrassedly replied that it was the servant. Enoch smiled and told his bride that rumors were just rumors, that they were just empty talk. Then the Duke shared that he was going to make an official announcement, and then all the gossip would disappear. The main character asked him when he was going to do it. The gentleman replied that in 30 days. The girl bowed her head in bewilderment and asked if he meant in 30 days. But Enoch suddenly said no, and that he was going to do it in just 30 minutes. The protagonist's eyes widened in surprise, and she asked Mr. Byron if he was joking. The man stood up from his chair and said that he always liked it when she reacted like that, but this time he was completely serious. The Duke, lifting her chin, called her his princess and said that he was going to leave and asked her not to do anything stupid while he was gone. Lady Lopez, thinking that the gentleman was going to kiss her, closed her eyes in fear and asked him not to kiss her. Enoch asked her to calm down and said that he was not going to do anything like that. The protagonist asked the man why he suddenly asked her about this, to which the young man asked if she really didn't understand. His Highness explained that she had been in trouble at this estate several times over the past few days. Eleanor felt ashamed when Enoch began to list how she first ended up in a dungeon where she fell into a trap, then accidentally found his hiding place with jewels. Mr. Byron asked with a smile whether he needed to continue this list, to which the lady promised not to wander around the palace anymore. Ellen was surprised when Enoch patted her on the head and called her a good girl. The man then told the bride that he would go as some business needed to be taken care of, but asked the lady to let him know if she needed anything. The man had already started to leave, and Ellen's fingers trembled as she hesitated over what to ask him. But then the girl said that she had a request for him, and his lordship turned around. The sorceress asked if he could bring her cat, whose name was Lucy, here, since no one else in that house fed her. Enoch grabbed the saddened main character by the cheeks and said that in that case he would take her away. The protagonist thanked him for this, but he said that everything was fine, after which he again asked Ellen not to go anywhere. Mr. Byron turned to her and said with a smile that he couldn't wait to visit the Lopez estate. From the gentleman's words, the main character was able to understand that he was already planning to visit her old house. Affectionately calling Elena his future bride, the man said that they would see each other later, after which the girl was left alone in the room. Lady Lopez began to tremble and bend over because her heart could not calm down. She decided to go out onto the balcony to get some fresh air. Even though she had run away from her previous home, any mention of it made her panic and fear. Cinderella assumes that she will probably never react differently again. It is like a child who has been beaten and fears any aggression. After admiring the view from the window, the protagonist realized that she needed some time to heal her mental trauma. Meanwhile, Enoch, having appeared at the ball, announced to everyone his engagement to Eleanor, which would take place at a charity evening dedicated to the arts. Seeing the gentleman begin to whisper, the man thought that this was an expected reaction, after which he wished everyone a pleasant evening. After the announcement, the young man headed for the exit, but he was surrounded on all sides by newspaper editors who wanted at least some kind of explanation from him. But Mr. Byron, ignoring the reporters, got into the carriage and asked the coachman to take him to the Lopez estate. Meanwhile, in this estate, Anthony, tugging the maid by the hair, asked why she was so slow, for which she apologized, and thought that he did not stop grumbling even after Eleanor left. Suddenly, someone knocked on their door, and the guy and his servant turned their heads towards the door in bewilderment. The youngest son opened the door to the stranger, wondering who it could be since they already had enough servants on the estate. But the boy was horrified when he saw the tall figure of the Duke in front of him, who asked if he was the blockhead hiding from the creditors. The young man greeted the gentleman in bewilderment, who, bending down to him, said that he had come here to pick up the cat and asked where the Baroness was. Anthony bowed his head and said that his mother was not feeling well at the moment, so the whole household fell on him. But His Highness said that it did not matter, and then ordered the boy to bring him a cat, asking if he understood which one he was talking about. He said in fear that they really did have one cat, but asked who had asked him about it, to which Enoch angrily asked him what he thought. Anthony, trembling all over, said that he would bring the cat now, but asked the gentleman to give him a couple of minutes. Watching the young man run away, the Duke thought that he was a weakling, and he couldn't believe that he had the courage to sit down at the gambling table. Looking at the paintings on the wall, Byron remembered that this family had once been influential, and for several centuries they had enjoyed high authority. But now that is a thing of the past, and the Lopez family has no lands or army. The Lord can understand why the Baron is so keen to keep his family name. Looking at the cobwebs on the ceiling, the man realized that they would have trials in the future because the mother of the current heir is a commoner, and the Baron himself works in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. However, the Duke of Bayern decided that before this happened, he would personally destroy their family. Then, a certain guest appeared to the man, whom Enoch greeted with a sly smile and a frighteningly ferocious look. It was Melissa, who was looking at him with a suspicious smile on her face, with her frightened brother hiding behind her. His Highness smirked when he saw Anthony hiding behind his sister's skirt. He knows he is not a danger to Ellen, unlike his relative. Melissa greeted the gentleman modestly and said that she heard that he had come for the cat. The girl said that her father was currently at work and her mother had fallen ill after Eleanor left, so the entire household was on their shoulders for now. The Duke realizes that this lady seems innocent and modest, but in fact she is just a fake who can stab him in the back at any moment. Enoch could destroy her like an annoying bug, do to her the same thing he did to her mother, but he thinks that would be too boring. The man smiled at her and said hello too, after which he said that they had not had time to get to know each other. The Baroness's daughter blushed and told the gentleman that he had been beside himself with rage the last time he had been to see them, and the girl asked if he had forgiven them. His Highness smiled good-naturedly and asked her what she thought. Melissa felt embarrassed and said that she shouldn't have asked that and apologized to Enoch, but he patted her on the shoulder and said that everything was fine. Madame's ears turned red with embarrassment when the young man touched her, but for the Duke this was only part of his cunning plan. Just in time, a servant came to his lordship with a cat named Lucy. Mr. Byron asked if it was the same cat, to which the servant replied that they had no others. Enoch said that she was somehow ugly. However, he extended his hands to the animal and invited it to come to him, but Lucy waved her claws and meowed loudly because she did not want his company. Enoch, surprised that the cat understood him, nevertheless took her into his arms, which she did not expect at all. The Duke was about to leave, but he remembered one thing and turned to the maid. The man asked his subordinate to prepare all of Eleanor's things because he would send a carriage for them in the evening. After this, His Highness left the Lopez estate and sat down in the carriage with Lucy. However, Melissa, who was still in the raging emotions after the Duke touched her, watched him closely from the window. The Duke noticed her and thought that she might be a much easier target than he thought. Mr. Byron has just planted some seeds and is very interested in what will come out of them. The main character was very happy when after so much time she was able to reunite with her Lucy. She promised the cat that now nothing would separate them and she would take care of her. Enoch, observing her, said that she seemed to be crazy about cats, to which she said that she was, but Lucy was special to her. The young man touched the girl's shoulder and said that she should be more attentive to her future groom and not to some cat. But the protagonist, apologizing to him, said that she has a reason why her pet is much more important to her. The gentleman folded his arms in displeasure and asked why she had then asked so much to make a deal, to which she replied that it had nothing to do with love. The man asked if she wasn't curious about subduing him with a love spell, but Ellen looked at him disapprovingly. The Duke frowned in displeasure when the girl said that she herself did not know. Suddenly, the man grabbed the future bride by the chin and said that she was quite brave and seemed to enjoy laughing at him, but Enoch asked the lady to be sure that no love spell would make him do this. He explained that it was simply not his style, then asked the beauty if she thought the same. After this, Eleanor was left alone in the room, thinking that she had not wanted to hurt Enoch's feelings at all. The heroine understands that their relationship will end anyway, so she can't stop pushing him away. In a year she will be alone, regardless of whether they have a good relationship. Ellen stroked Lucy's tummy and sincerely apologized to her for leaving her. Meanwhile, at Freyden Palace, a stunned servant approached the butler and said that bad news had arrived. The butler asked what was wrong. The subordinate apologized for his manners, but handed the man a fresh newspaper. The butler's eyes almost popped out of his head when he read the latest news, and he immediately decided to report everything to the king. His Majesty was busy with work at the time, but upon hearing someone knock on his door, he allowed the man to enter. The discouraged butler rushed towards the gentleman with a newspaper, and the latter, staring at him, asked what was the matter. The subordinate, handing Henry the latest news, said that before he began, he wanted to reassure him. He took the paper in his hands with a grin, laughing at the need to calm him down, since at the moment there was nothing that could upset him. But as soon as he glanced at the contents of the newspaper, his face immediately darkened. The frightened butler asked if everything was all right. The news said that Enoch Byrne had announced his engagement to the Baron's daughter, Lady Lopez. The king, dumbfounded, asked why he had done this. The servant asked His Highness what he would order to be done in such a case. Henry said that the public needed to be reassured, and then asked that the Marquis of Philoane be informed that he would speak with Enoch, and that he would come to the Winter Palace now. The man realized with excitement that his brother had finally done this after so much time, because Enoch had always caused problems. He was not a fool like their youngest brother Julian, but Henry's life would have been much easier if he had been the same. His Majesty sighed wearily and wondered what he should do now. Arriving at the Winter Palace with a certain box in his hands, the king turned to the chief butler and asked where Enoch was now. Henry was surprised when the servant said that the master was currently spending time with his bride. But he still asked the butler where exactly they were, saying that he was sure that they should not be in bed at that hour. The old man asked the master to follow him so that he could take him to them, and Henry followed him and asked his servants to wait for him here. Following his escort, the king found himself in a magnificent palace garden. The butler then pointed to the place where His Highness and Lady Lopez were sitting. It turned out to be a spacious gazebo in which the couple sat down on a bench. His Majesty, looking at them, thought that something was wrong. The engagement took place suddenly, so he thought that there was a stormy love affair between them, but they looked like just acquaintances. Henry, approaching them, smiled affably and greeted the newlyweds. Ellen looked at the king in confusion, and Enoch asked who gave him permission to break in, to which he replied that this was how he greeted his brother. The ruler smiled at the girl and said that he hoped he had not interrupted something important. Eleanor, rising to her feet, wished the gentleman a good day and apologized for not greeting him immediately. He said that everything was fine, then asked with a smile how she was getting on in this palace and whether Enoch was causing her any inconvenience. Henry winked at the sorceress and added that, as she could already see, he was quite problematic. However, the lady sheepishly said that this was not the case at all, after which she thanked the man for his concern. The king thought that Enoch's bride was reserved and well-mannered, and his brother could take advantage of this. His Majesty said that he was very glad to hear this, and that he would like to ask a couple of questions anyway. But suddenly, Mr. Byrne gloomily asked Eleanor why she didn't go to the palace. Eleanor said she hoped they would have a good time, and then left them. The king looked at his brother and thought that he had never imagined him to be so cautious. Enoch wanted to protect Lopez, but it was not like him. Finally, Mr. Byrne asked His Majesty what brought him here. He said that everyone was criticizing his sudden engagement and that it put him in an awkward position. His Majesty added that as for Marcus Anderson, there were rumors that Enoch Byrne had beaten him severely. But suddenly, the Duke, frowning angrily, told his brother that the old man deserved it. The king, indignantly, said that he did not have to resort to violence, since a man of his status should be more careful, to which His Highness replied that he could take care of himself. Looking at Enoch's back, Henry wondered what he should do with him, and whether Lady Lopez would be able to tame the beast in him, which was why he insisted on marrying Philoane. He asked his brother if he really wanted to marry Eleanor, since her family was going through hard times. The puzzled Duke asked the king if he wouldn't be better off if he got married, but he said, somewhat upset, that that was not what he was asking about. Mr. Byrne, happily lighting a cigar, told his friend that he did not deny it, then asked him simply not to interfere in this family. His Majesty looked at the Duke and raised his eyebrows in bewilderment, asking why he was saying that. He replied that there would be nothing left of the Lopez family once they destroyed Marquis Anderson, and he simply shouldn't dirty his hands with them. Henry asked if that meant there were more minuses than pluses, to which Enoch said yes, and that he had already observed Anderson and Viscount Zealand. His Highness smiled at his brother and explained that he just needed to leave all the dirty work to him, and he just needed to remain a good king. His Majesty, looking at the Duke with regret, thought that he was right, and it had always been that way. He had never defeated him in a fair fight. You became crown prince because of Enoch. Henry heard these words countless times when he ascended to the throne, and he knows that he will forever be indebted to Mr. Byrne for this. The ruler told his friend that he had some business to attend to, and so he needed to return to the palace, but he had prepared one surprise for His Highness. The king handed his brother a small square box and said that it was for him. When Enoch took the gift in his hands, he asked what it was, to which he answered seriously that it was shoes. Byron asked him to explain what he meant. Then Henry revealed that this box contained the very same glass slipper that Lady Lopez had lost during the ball at the royal palace.